Velkommen til Vendepunkt, Norad-konferansen 2022. Vi får storfint besøk, ett stykk utviklingsminister, flere nasjonale eksperter og verdensledende stemmer. Ja, det her rett og slett årets viktigste konferanse for deg som opptatt av klima, bærekraft og fattigdomsbekjempelse. Jeg heter Asta Bosinje-Lydersen og skal lede dere gjennom programmet. Konferansen heldigital og delt i 3, med gode pauser imellom. Så om du følger oss live eller i etterkant, så har du derfor mye å glede deg til. Det blir faglig input og engasjerte samtaler. Vi skal utfordre gamle tankesett og presentere nye ideer og løsninger. Og for å kickstarte det hele, dagens vert, Norad-direktør Bård Vegar Solhjell.
Takk for det, Asta. Jeg sitter hjemme med en fersk positiv koronatest, men heldigvis veldig god form på løpet. Jeg likevel glad for å si til alle sammen, velkommen på vegne av oss i Norad. Vi har laget et veldig spennende program, synes vi, og vi har 1700 påmeldte og mange flere som følger oss på forskjellige streamer. Titelen på konferansen Vendepunkt, og Vendepunkt et fint ord, synes jeg, men det kanskje enda mer treffende på engelsk, som den engelske titelen på konferansen, Game Changing Solutions. Jeg kan dy meg for engelske ord i norsk språk selv, men her inneholder ordet noe mer. Et vendepunkt som på en måte endrer spillereglene, snur opp ned på utviklingen, akselererer framgang. Og et sånt vendepunkt, det fikk vi i fjor. Jeg vil påstå at det var det viktigste framskrittet verden gjorde i 2021. For etter 10 år med forskning, mange millioner investeringer, så klarte verden endelig å utvikle en vaksine mot malaria. Det har tatt 35 år. En nordmann, Tore Godal, han var med på å starte det her, og har jobbet for det siden. Ifølge Verdens helseorganisasjon så vil malariavaksiner kunne berge mellom 40 000 og 80 000 liv hvert eneste år. Den ikke perfekt. Vi må rulle den ut, vi må få en enda bedre vaksine med større effekt, men den vil likevel bli en game changer, et vendepunkt. Å slå den typen framskritt, den synes jeg verdt å feire. For de kommer ikke av seg selv. Det resultatet av systematisk arbeid, av akademisk forskning, økonomiske investeringer og politisk vilje. Og den verden vi lever i, det tiåret vi i, de utfordringene vi står i, de roper etter den typen vendepunkt. For det første, fordi pilene har snudd. Etter en generasjon med sosial og økonomisk framgang, så blir det nå flere ekstremt fattige i verden. De siste estimater, tall dere vil få oppsummert etterpå i en rapport fra Norad, peker på at så mange som 100 millioner mennesker kan ha blitt skjøvet ut i ekstrem fattigdom under pandemien. Dernest fordi klimakrisa og Parisavtalens 1,5-gradersmål krever at verden grovt sett halverer utslippene sine på et 10 år til 2030, og når netto null rundt 2050. Samtidig som vi tar vare på naturen vår. Og den viktigste endringen vi skal gjennom, det en total energiomstilling fra fossil til fornybar. Og der klimafinansiering gjennom bistandsbudsjettet Norges sentrale internasjonale virkemiddel. For å nå målene, det det tredje poenget her, så må vi bruke rett verktøy. Vi må gjøre det kunnskapen forteller oss har størst effekt for å avskaffe fattigdom, kutte utslipp og redusere ulikhet. Altså å nå bærekraftsmålene. Og da må vi la fakta ha makta. Bistand og utviklingspolitikk kan være mektige våpen. Og norsk bistand har oppnådd imponerende resultat sammen med andre. Norsk vaksinebistand har vært en avgjørende faktor i å vaksinere over 500 000 barn mellom 2005 og 2016. Fra 2013 til 2016 bidro Norge til at 3,1 millioner barn fikk gå på skole gjennom det vi finansierte. Og i perioden den norske regnskogsatsingen arbeidet med Brasil, så ble det spart utslipp på 4 milliarder tonn CO2. Og for å forstå hva det tilsvarer omtrent 70 ganger så mye som Norges årlige utslipp. For eksempel, så bistand virker, men bare god bistand virker. Og siste del i dag skal handle om hva som gir resultat, og hva som ikke gjør det. Hvordan vi lar fakta ha makta. Her og nå står vi lenger fra å nå bærekraftsmålene enn vi har gjort på lenge. Men vi mennesker har i oss og i stand til å løse enorme utfordringer når vi samarbeider. Det bakteppet for dagens konferanse. Løsninger, vendepunkt. Velkommen til en flott dag sammen med oss i Norad.
Tusen takk, Bård Vegar. Da jo tonen satt, og konferansen som sagt delt i 3. Det første temaet vi skal ta for oss, det temaet fattigdom og ulikhet. Og i løpet av dette tiåret så skal vi jo ifølge FN utrydde ekstrem fattigdom, men hvordan ligger vi egentlig an sett i lyset av pandemien? Det vet fagdirektør i utviklingsøkonomi Lars Loe om. Han har bakgrunn fra offentlig økonomi, makroøkonomi og inntektsfordeling, og har blant annet jobbet i Finansdepartementet og de siste 15 årene i Norad. Lars Loe står klar med statusrapporten, men først ta en titt på dette.
Now, our aim is to meet those Millennium Development Goals and for us to dedicate ourselves to work together to eliminate in our time and in this generation the worst of deprivation and poverty. Yet so great is the distance that we still have to travel to achieve them that they could only be met by all of us each playing our part.
Our aim is clear, our mission is possible, and our destination is in our sight. An end to extreme poverty by 2030. A life for peace and dignity for all.
Ja, hva kreves nå for å nå målet? Fattigdomsmålet har en ambisjon om å utrydde alle former for fattigdom overalt. Det sentrale delmålet likevel å utrydde ekstrem fattigdom, definert som å leve for mindre enn 1,90 amerikanske dollar om dagen. Bildet av utviklingen siden 1990 viser et grunnlag for optimisme, men også det som nå bekymrer. Framgangen har vært stor, men bremset opp allerede før pandemien som har skapt en bratt motbakke. Antallet ekstremfattige har falt med 1,2 milliarder mennesker siden 1990. Det i Asia fattigdommen har gått sterkest ned. Kina alene med mellom 600 og 700 millioner mennesker. I Afrika sør for Sahara har derimot ekstremfattigdommen økt med 150 millioner mennesker siden 1990. Forskjellen i den bakenforliggende økonomiske utviklingen tydelig. Her målt med vekst i nasjonalprodukt per innbygger. Det forteller mye om utviklingen i gjennomsnittlig inntektsnivå. Mange asiatiske land bygde en vekstmotor med høye investeringer, eksportindustrier og bred næringsutvikling som ga høy og langvarig framgang. Flere og mer produktive jobber støttet opp av økt utdanningsnivå og lavere befolkningsvekst. I Afrika sør for Sahara befolkningsveksten fortsatt nærmere 3%. Også denne regionen hadde, som vi ser, et godt første tiår i dette årtusenet, men var nok for mye drevet av høye råvarepriser og for lite av framtidsrettet næringsutvikling. Med like rask nedgang i fattigdom som Vietnam ville fattigdomsmålet kunne nås rundt 2030 i Uganda og Tanzania. Malawi ville selv med en slik framgang trenge en god del år til. Det er i vår tid vanskeligere å utnytte verdensmarkeder og teknologi på samme måte som da de asiatiske landene klarte dette. Internasjonal konkurranse er blitt tøffere, og produksjonsmetoder mer høyteknologiske og kompetansekrevende. En mer realistisk vei for Afrika sør for Sahara kan være å prioritere en industrivekst mer rettet mot nasjonale og regionale markeder, kombinert med styrking av produktiviteten i en sterk voksende tjenestesektor og ikke minst landbruket. Fattigdomsutfordringen er mer enn de anslagsvis 700 millioner ekstremfattige. 24% eller 1,8 milliarder mennesker lever for under $3,2 om dagen, eller nesten like mange som var under ekstremfattigdomsgrensen i 1990. Mer enn 1 milliard mennesker lever over ekstremfattigdomsgrensen, men under $3,2 om dagen. Globalt lever rundt 44% eller 3,5 milliard mennesker for under $5,5 om dagen. Forskjellen på landgruppene er stor. I lavinntektslandene sett under ett er nesten halvparten ekstremfattige. I gjennomsnitt er inntektsnivå i øvre mellominntektsland nesten 9 ganger høyere enn det er i lavinntektsland. I lavere mellominntektsland er det 3,5 ganger høyere. De fleste lavinntektslandene er i Afrika sør for Sahara. I tillegg har noen av de lavere mellominntektslandene høy fattigdom. Det ferske mellominntektslandet Tanzania er et eksempel. Denne figuren bryter opp det globale bildet med tenkte 10-cents-grenser over ekstremfattigdomsgrensen. For hver 10. cent fattigdomsgrensen heves, øker antall fattige i gjennomsnitt med nærmere 70 millioner mennesker. 10 cent per dag, eller 1 krone, antyder også at lite skal til av tilbakeslag før antallet under ekstremfattigdomsgrensen på $1,9 øker. Et annet bekymringsfullt trekk ved fattigdomsbildet er fattigdommens dybde, eller hvor langt under ekstremfattigdomsgrensen forbruket til de ekstremfattige er. Selv om den internasjonale grensen på $1,9 er lav og betegnes ekstrem fattigdom, har flere land lavere nasjonale grenser og mange med forbruk betydelig under den internasjonale grensen. De er ultrafattige. Og dyp fattigdom er nok noe av forklaringen når effekten av økonomisk vekst på antall fattige har vært svak i mange land. Fattigdom handler ikke bare om forbruk og inntekt. Flerdimensjonal fattigdom måles som kritisk lav tilgang på helsetjenester, skole, elektrisitet, sanitærforhold eller rent vann. I utviklingslandet sett under ett anslås 1,3 milliarder mennesker å leve i flerdimensjonal fattigdom. Også for slik fattigdom har det vært nedgang. En skal være forsiktig med å sammenligne her, men når flerdimensjonal fattigdom i mange land har falt raskere enn ekstremfattigdom, kan det avspeile at tilgangen på helsetjenester og rent vann er bedret raskere enn avlinger eller lønninger. Pandemien skapte det største globale tilbakeslaget siden 2. verdenskrig. I figuren er avviket fra de makroøkonomiske trendene, slik de så ut ved starten av 2020, sammenlignet med bildet i januar i år. Nullinja er utviklingen uten pandemi. Rike land ble rammet kraftig, men skaden sitter dypere i fattigere land. Figuren kan gi inntrykk at det bare er snakk om lengre tid. Men mange av utviklingslandene som henter inn tapet noen år etter rike land, vil ha flere mer langvarige skader enn det figuren egentlig fanger inn. Den viktige forskjellen er skaden på selve produksjonsapparatet, menneskenes produktivitet og ikke minst statsfinansene. Alt dette er mer sårbart, og skadene får vokse seg større desto lenger lav vaksinering opprettholder usikkerheten. I lavinntektsland er bare 5,5% fullvaksinerte i midten av januar. Rike land har dessuten ikke bare vaksinert i stor stil, men brukt formidable finansielle muskler på å begrense skaden på økonomienes virkemåte. Rike land har realøkonomisk og finansiell ryggrad til å tåle økt gjeld. I fattige land truer statlige gjeldskriser ikke bare statenes økonomi, men også tilgangen på private investeringer. Faren for selvforsterkende svekkelse er stor, og pågår allerede. Heldigvis er dette mekanismer som kan snus til selvforsterkende oppgang. Det krever at økt internasjonal støtte og bedre nasjonal politikk understøtter hverandre gjensidig. Pandemien har ført til at husholdningsundersøkelser som danner grunnlaget for å måle fattigdom og levekår er stoppet opp. Det gjøres derfor anslag basert på antatt fall i forbruk og inntekt. Figuren viser Verdensbankens anslag, der antallet ekstremfattige i 2020 og 2021 beregnes å være nesten 100 millioner flere enn uten pandemien. Tilbakeslaget var antatt størst i 2020 og hentet seg noe inn som følge av oppgang i 2021. Usikkerheten er stor om de 2 første pandemiårene, enda større videre fremover. De akutte utfordringene er vaksinering og finansiering. Gitt at disse håndteres godt nok, er spørsmålet hva slags utvikling som kan gjenreises ut av det. Å gå fra dagens utgangspunkt til asiatiske veksteventyr er urealistisk. Fattigdomsbildet og mer realistiske vekstscenarier fremover tilsier at jevnere fordeling må gjøre en større del av jobben enn tidligere for å få ned fattigdommen. Verdensbankens scenarier til 2030 illustrerer dette tydelig. Med samme gjennomsnittlig og jevnt fordelte inntektsvekst som det siste tiåret før pandemien, vil oppunder 600 millioner fortsatt være ekstremfattige i 2030. I dette tallet er ikke Verdensbankens egne anslag på økt fattigdom som følge av klimaendringer med, ytterligere mer enn 100 millioner. Tilstrekkelig bidrag fra mindre ulikhet vil også bli krevende. Desto færre år det er til at 2030-målet skal nås, desto større, mer direkte og raskt virkende innsats vil kreves. Ofte med en pris i form av mindre finansielt rom for å bygge langsiktig vekst. Flertallet av de fattige bor på landsbygda, der produktiviteten i landbruket er en sentral faktor. Men millioner av mennesker søker nå byene hvert år. Bedre jobber i den sterkt voksende tjenestesektoren og industri vil være avgjørende både for deres levekår og den langsiktige vekstevnen i økonomiene. Det er store finansieringsbehov på alle områder. Det gir dilemmaer i nasjonal politikk og i utviklingsfinansiering. Uten bedre kraftforsyning og annen infrastruktur bremses næringsutvikling som kan gi varig høy vekst opp. Uten større og mer direkte innsats mot fattige, enten det er et tiltak i landbruket eller annen målrettet innsats, kan store grupper fattige forbli frikoblet fra utvikling. Selv om en lykkes å få ny fart i finansiering av investeringer og annen innsats som fremmer næringsgrunnlaget, kreves trolig økte bidrag fra direkte overføringer for å virke raskt nok og bredt nok i et gjenstridig fattigdomsbilde. Utbygging av slike ordninger har skutt fart, men betyr fortsatt lite i totalbildet. Potensialet for omfordeling er begrenset i de fattigste landene. Land noe oppover på inntektsskalaen kan ha skattegrunnlag å ta av, ikke minst land med ressursrikdom. Men de mangler progressive skattesystemer som gjør jobben. Det er ikke bare en administrativ, men først og fremst en politisk utfordring. På kort sikt vil direkte innsats mot fattige handle mer om omprioritering innenfor trange statsbudsjetter og bistand enn omfordeling fra de rike i deres egne land. Utgangspunktet er at verden nå er ute av kurs for å nå fattigdomsmålet. Hvor sterke dilemmaene blir, og hvor stor framgang som kan oppnås, vil fremover avhenge av politikken landene velger å føre, og hvor mye finansiell og annen støtte fra verdenssamfunnet de får.
Ja, det var et stort, komplekst og alvorlig bilde som Lars Loe tegnet opp der. Tusen takk, Lars. hva skal man gjøre? Det som vi vet sikkert at vi må gjøre noe. Og så finnes det noen som sitter sentralt plassert i det arbeidet, og en av dem utviklingsminister Beathe Tvinnereim. Velkommen til Norad-konferansen.
Tusen takk for det.
Nå hørte vi jo at ekstremfattigdommen var allerede økende før pandemien. Men under pandemien så har det altså blitt 100 millioner flere ekstremfattige i verden. Hva de viktigste grepene for å snu den utviklingen?
Det jo flere. For det første så må jeg si at titelen på dette seminaret, Vendepunktet, det veldig godt. Og dette budskapet burde egentlig vært sendt på CNN og Al Jazeera og BBC og overalt, fordi vi har 8 år på oss før 2030 for å nå bærekraftsmålene. Og nå ser vi at det eksploderer og går i feil retning. Etter faktisk noen tiår med en positiv utvikling i bekjempelse av fattigdom. Det vi må ta inn over oss først og fremst at det holder ikke å bake kaka større. Vi må også se på fordelingen av det, og vi må se på hvordan vi baker denne kaka. Fordi vi kan ikke fortsette vi kan jo ikke fortsette å produsere et overskudd på den måten vi har gjort før, fordi at vi må bekjempe klimakrisen og tap av naturmangfold samtidig. Og så må vi få på plass apparater for omfordeling. Og da må jo vi, for eksempel, som Norge som aktør, jobbe normativt med de internasjonale systemene i forhold til skatt, bekjempelse av korrupsjon og så videre. Samtidig som vi sørger for å få på plass vekst nedenfra. Altså jeg veldig opptatt av at denne veksten må skapes i lokalsamfunn. Vi må starte der.
Men nå var du inne på dette med omfordeling, og det var jo også et sentralt poeng Lars Loe kom med på slutten av sin innledning. Omfordeling, og da nevner han jo at man ikke på en måte bare kan tenke på vekst og omfordeling internt i for eksempel lavinntektsland, men at man må se på kanskje en hardere prioritering og omfordeling innenfor bistandsbudsjettene. Hva tenker du om det?
Jeg tror vi må jobbe langs flere linjer. Altså bistandsforte jo at vi kan sikte den inn mot de aller fattigste og aller mest marginaliserte. Og så må vi ha med oss private på laget for å dra denne utviklingen i riktig retning. Og så må jeg også tilbake til dette med fattigdomskrisen skal bekjempes samtidig som vi skal bekjempe en klimakrise. Men dette kan dette kan ses i sammenheng. Og det jo på en måte det mandatet jeg har fått med meg som bistandsminister. I Hurdalsplattformen vår så står det at vi skal forene kampen for utvikling med kampen mot klimaendringer. Og mange av de aller fattigste i verden jo også de som mest utsatt for klimaendringer, så klimatilpassing kommer til å stå veldig sentralt i innsatsen vår. Det handler jo blant annet om småbønder og matprodusentene der ute, som Lars Loe var inne på, en særlig utsatt gruppe, men hvor vi også vet at hvis vi klarer å få produktiviteten i landbruket, så har det en veldig stor avkastningseffekt.
Ja, vi skal snakke litt mer om akkurat det med landbruk etterpå, men jeg tenker fortsatt på det sporet i forhold til det med omfordeling, fordi det som komplisert med bærekraftsmålene jo at verden jo så kompleks, og bærekraftsmålene synliggjør jo nettopp det ved at alle disse tingene henger sammen med alt. Så man skal både jobbe med fattigdomsbekjempelse, og man skal jobbe med klima. Kan du si litt mer om hvordan denne regjeringen kommer til å gjøre det?
Å bekjempe dette samtidig?
Ja.
Nettopp. Igjen, denne utviklingen må skapes nedenfra. Og jeg opptatt av å bygge for eksempel lokale verdikjeder som skaper en ripple-effekt. Det vi ute etter jo samfunnsendring, ikke sant? Og det må skapes gjennom mange ulike virkemidler. Men vi vet jo at, og nå jeg tilbake til dette, du spurte hvordan kan man se dette i sammenheng, blant annet gjennom å investere i, jeg nevnte landbruk, men også fornybar energi. Det å gi tilgang til fornybar energi gir ikke bare mulighet for lokale verdikjeder, men det skaper også en masse andre ringvirkninger og bærekraftige jobber.
Du hadde lyst til å snakke litt om dette med landbruk, og hvorfor spiller for eksempel landbruk og småbønder en viktig rolle i dette?
Vi vet at veldig mange av de aller fattigste de som selv matprodusenter. Mange av de som sulter selv matprodusenter, og det jo et stort paradoks. Og så jeg opptatt av at landbruk, primærnæringen, landbruk, fiske, det jo på en måte der vi kommer fra. Det var der vårt eget land kom fra, og vi skulle gjennom et hamskifte. Ikke sant? Norge gikk gjennom det vi kaller det store hamskiftet som en del av vår utvikling. Dette jo prosesser som veldig mange utviklingsland nå står midt oppe i. Og det å legge til rette for at man i landbruket da kan skape et overskudd, samtidig som man legger om til bærekraftig landbruk og sørge for at folk har mat i magen, det mener jeg veldig, veldig god utvikling.
På hvilken måte tenker du da at norske erfaringer kan være nyttig å ha med inn i hvordan man tenker da om utviklingspolitikk? Du nevnte det store hamskiftet. Det sammenlignbart med de utfordringene som finnes i lavinntektsland i sør i dag?
Vi har mange erfaringer fra Norge som jeg mener relevant å ta med inn i bistanden. Nå snakker vi akkurat om landbruk. Måten vi har organisert oss på gjennom for eksempel samvirker i norsk primærnæring, det en erfaring som jeg vet etterspurt i mange utviklingsland. Men det mange andre ting som vi har å være stolte av i Norge som jeg mener vi skal ta med videre. En ting jeg veldig opptatt av universaliteten i de sosiale sikkerhetsnettene. At vi i bistanden sørger for at man har at det legger til rette for universelle ordninger som tilgjengelige for alle. Unngå at man lager A- og B-løsninger, private tilbydere og så videre, som gjør at som i neste omgang vil skape ulikhet i de landene vi snakker om. Det har jo vært en suksessfaktor for Norge, som jeg mener vi må huske på når vi nå bidrar i utviklingen.
Men å skape sånne type universelle løsninger, det krever en viss økonomi i bånd. Det det mange land som ikke har.
Det klart, men vi vet jo også kostnaden ved å designe institusjoner og samfunn som skaper ulikhet på sikt. Det å redusere ulikhet, det også veldig god økonomi, og det nødvendig for å skape gode samfunn.
Nå startet vi denne samtalen med å snakke om pandemiens ringvirkninger, og et av de poengene som Lars Loe trekker frem, og som har vært diskutert veldig, veldig mye, det handler jo om tilgang til vaksiner. Jeg har bakgrunn fra Uganda og familie der, og de får jo vaksiner gjennom COVAX, men det mange som ikke vil ta de. Og det tenker jeg synliggjør også en del av det hvor komplekst alt dette at det kan være mangel på kunnskap, mangel på utdannelse og andre typer faktorer som at man kanskje ikke stoler på myndighetene, som gjør at man da ikke benytter seg av de tilbudene. Kan du kommentere det på noen måte, og hvordan Norge vil bidra til en bedre vaksinedekning for eksempel?
Ja, det var et stort spørsmål.
Ja.
Du var inne på dette med tillit, og det jo også helt grunnleggende. Vi må designe systemer hvor vi bygger tillit mellom myndigheter og befolkning. Det ikke minst viktig i helsesektoren. Når det gjelder pandemihåndtering, så tror jeg at vi går inn i et år nå hvor svaret blir enda mer komplekst enn det vi liksom stort sett har diskutert det foregående året. Vi har hatt veldig fokus på å få opp vaksineproduksjonen. Det viktig. Det har vært veldig fokus på den dypt urettferdige og ujevne fordelingen av vaksiner i verden. Det tror jeg vi kommer til å se en rask løsning på nå, blant annet gjennom de systemene vi har bygd opp. Men vi kommer til å det kommer til å kreve veldig mye skreddersøm i hvert enkelt land for faktisk å få satt disse vaksinene. Og nå ser vi jo hvordan svake helsesystemer, altså fra bånn, begrenser hvordan vi skal få rullet ut vaksinene. Og det har vi egentlig visst i mange måneder, at vi kommer til å komme til et stadie hvor det der begrensningene ligger. Og jeg skuffa over at ikke vi har kommet lenger i på en måte den generelle styrkinga av helsesystemene i sør. Fordi det der begrensningen kommer til å ligge nå. Og så synliggjør, altså det høres kanskje rart ut, men altså pandemien har jo det har synliggjort svakhetene ved det globale helsesystemet og de nasjonale altså delivery-systemene i helsesektoren. Kanskje det da en vekker, sånn at vi kan få gjort noe med de grunnleggende tjenestene, fordi at pandemihåndtering, det et globalt fellesgode. Dette gjør vi for verden, men vi gjør det også for oss selv. Ikke sant? Det helt nødvendig å få dette på plass. Da må vi også investere i grunnleggende helsesystemer i utviklingsland. Så det har i hvert fall vært en øyeåpner for verden, håper jeg.
Denne samtalen går mot slutten. Det noe du har lyst til å dele helt til slutt? Har du en positiv nyhet eller en ny satsning, så har du sjansen da. Jeg tror du har fått med deg at jeg veldig opptatt av matsikkerhet. Jeg mener at mat i magen, det nødvendig for at unger skal lære, for at medisiner skal fungere i kroppene våre, og så videre, og så videre. Jeg kommer til å bruke mye tid nå, det neste halve året, på å designe en stor ny innsats for bistand til matsikkerhet. Gleder meg til en tett dialog med norsk sivilsamfunn og andre aktører som vil bidra inn i denne nye satsingen på matsikkerhet. Det tror jeg blir veldig spennende. Tusen takk, statsråd Beathe Tvinnereim. Yes, vi går nå inn for en ny del. Vi tilbake om et øyeblikk, og da på engelsk og i selskap av en verdenskjent fransk økonom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're very excited to present our first international guest. From his academic home at the Paris School of Economics, he takes a historical and statistical approach to show why some stay rich, while others can't seem to break the cycle of poverty. He's professor of economics at the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences and author of the best-selling book Capital in the 21st Century from 2013. His latest book, Capital and Ideology, was published in 2019 and has a global scope, focusing on how wealth is accumulated and inequality disseminated in different societies around the world. He's not here to talk about personal wealth and inheritance, as some would expect. His talk today is on development aid, carbon emissions, and rising inequality. Professor Thomas Piketty, we are all ears.
Hello, and thanks a lot for your invitation. Sorry, I would love to be with you, and I'm afraid I am in my office in Paris. So let me actually try to share my screen, and I hope this is You can see this now. So, in this talk, I am going to talk also about inequality, because I think this is very important when we talk about carbon emissions and when we talk about development aid. So what I'm going to do in this short presentation is basically two things. First, I'm going to show you some new evidence on income, wealth, but also gender and carbon inequality coming from the new World Inequality Database and the brand new World Inequality Report 2022, which was just published a few weeks ago. And, this comes from a very collective project involving over 100 researchers from all over the world. And this is, something on which we have put a lot of energy developing this capacity, and which is a sort of a way to observe the world through the lenses of inequality. And then I will talk about the consequences for development aid. To summarize, the big message of this presentation, I think the magnitude of global inequality, and in particular of negative climate externalities, imposed by the richest economic actors on this planet, implies that in a way we need to go beyond standard development aid and confront inequality in an even more ambitious manner. And so I just throw on the table, one simple proposal. But what about sharing at least a fraction of global tax revenues paid by the world's most powerful economic actors, typically multinationals, billionaires, between all countries according to population? We've been talking a lot about international tax reform in 2021, but by and large, countries in the South were, completely forgotten from this discussion. So let me start with point one about the new evidence about rising inequality. So, I'm going to show you some data from the World Inequality Database. You can go online to the World Inequality Database website to get more details. Let me start with this simple map of the world showing you, the share of total income going to the top 10% of the citizen of each country. So if we had complete equality, the top 10% should get 10% of total income. If we had complete inequality, they should get 100%. So in practice, of course, the world is in between the two, in between 10 and 100%. But what I want to argue here, what I want to show you is that there's a lot of variation. So, basically it goes from 20, 25, 30% in Europe to as much as 65 or almost 70% in a country like South Africa. So, it doesn't go from 10 to 100, but it goes from 20 to 70. So it's enormous variation. So inequality matters. And it's even more spectacular when you look at the bottom 50% share, which in a way, is even more important. And here you can see that it goes from, if we had complete equality, the bottom 50% should get 50% of total income. If we had complete inequality, they should get 0. So in practice, of course, it's always between the two again, but it goes from as little as 5% in a country like South Africa to 25%, in some European countries. So it varies from a factor of 1 to 5, from 5 to 25%, which implies that, for a given average income, for a given per capita GDP in a given country, the average income of the bottom 50% can vary from a factor of 1 to 5. So again, the big lesson is that the distribution of income matters a lot. And if you only care about aggregate GDP and economic growth, etc., you forget about the environment, of course, but you also forget about what really matters for the bottom 50% of the population. Now, this is data on income inequalities that we have developed over the year in the World Inequality Database. Recently, we've been publishing this World Inequality Report, extending our work looking at wealth, gender inequality, and maybe even more importantly, carbon emissions, which I'm gonna get at to conclude this presentation. So first of all, regarding the concentration of wealth or capital ownership, including real estate, business wealth, financial assets, everything that household can own around the world. here the big message is that the concentration of capital ownership is always a lot more extreme than income inequality. This is particularly extreme in developing countries. So if you look in sub-Saharan Africa or in Latin America, which is a very unequal region, the bottom 50% owns only 1% of total wealth. So, this is extremely small. Now, in Europe, which is, again, the most equal country, the most equal region of the world, the bottom 50% owns 4% of total wealth. So, this is better than 1%, of course, but, it is still very small. And even in a country like Norway or, France, it will be typically less than 5%. So here, this means that the inequality in economic opportunities and the possibility to participate to the economy, because the ownership of wealth is also, the opportunity to create a business, to own your home, to put your family in a home. This is really your capacity to act on your own life. This is extremely unequally distributed, particularly in developing countries. Another novelty about our inequality perspective in the World Inequality Report 2022 is this new perspective on gender inequality. Sometimes we look at gender inequality for a given job, for a given occupation, and we say, oh, okay, women earn 10% or 20% less than men for this given job and occupation. But of course, in practice, one of the main problems is that women don't have access to the same job and occupation. And if you take the share of women in total labor income, in fact, it's pretty small, pretty much everywhere. You can see on this graph that all regions in the world, are pretty far from gender parity. And even, in Europe, in Western Europe, it is comparable to the level of China, which, interestingly enough, it has been actually going down in recent decades. That's partly because the increase of the share going to the top of the distribution, because most people at the top are actually men, has this kind of paradoxical effect on the time trend. Anyway, the big message here again is that the indicators that we use to measure what we do are very important, because this can give us a different perspective. Let me conclude with what I view as sort of probably the most important indicator if we want to talk about development aid, inequality at the global level, which is the very high level of concentration of carbon emissions. So that's one of the big novelties in this World Inequality Report 2022, that we are able for all regions of the world, all countries in the world, to decompose, the level of carbon emissions for the different groups in the distribution. And we already knew that, of course, carbon emissions at the global level are very unequally distributed. So typically, countries in the north, emit a lot of carbon, and countries in the south are going to suffer from this carbon emission. What we show here is that within each country and within each region of the world, we also have enormous inequality. So, here you see in Europe, if you look at the bottom 50% of the population, the average carbon emission is about 5 tons of carbon, which is, still too much. This has to be reduced, but, this is sort of more or less in line with the European objective for 2030 or 2040. Now, the problem is that the top 10% emit 29 tons of carbon, and if you were to look at the top 1%, even in Europe, it would be over 70 tons of carbon, which is a level that you see in North America already for the top 10%. And this is the same in all regions in the world. Look at South and Southeast Asia, for instance. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that if we design solutions to fight global warming and also to organize development aid where we treat everybody in the same manner, and for instance we have proportional carbon tax in order to reduce everybody by the same proportion, we are missing a big part of the reality, and also maybe we're going to have a big problem, convincing people in the bottom 50% that they need to make the same proportional effort than people in the top 10%. So general conclusion, we have to take inequality very seriously if we want to, fight, the biggest challenges we have to confront in the world today, which in my view are rising inequality and global warming. We need probably to think beyond standard development aid. When we talk about international tax reform, the taxation of multinationals, we should take the right of all countries to development and the right of all countries to access, tax base, or tax resource on a sustainable basis. We should take these rights seriously. Otherwise, we are going to face a bigger and bigger problem, and in some case, violence and major difficulties to meet our global sustainable development goal objective. Thanks a lot for your attention.
And thank you so much, Professor. That was really food for thought, and it provided a great backdrop for the upcoming panel. Ja, for nå bygger vi videre på Piketty sitt innlegg med en samtale om ulikhet og utvikling. Her i studio har vi samlet et panel med engasjerte fagfolk. Gry Ballestad, avdelingsleder for utvikling og humanitært arbeid i Norsk Folkehjelp. Før det jobbet hun i FN-systemet. Hun har ledet humanitærseksjonen i Redd Barna og Midtøsten-seksjonen i Flyktninghjelpa. Så har vi Line Hegna, daglig leder i SAIH, studentenes og akademikernes internasjonale hjelpefond. Hun har tidligere ledet Redd Barnas arbeid med politikk, kommunikasjon og kampanje, og jobbet for FNs utviklingsprogram UNDP. Og så har vi Kristin Clemet, daglig leder i tenketanken Civita, med en lang politisk karriere bak seg. Utdannings- og forskningsminister, arbeids- og administrasjonsminister, samt stortingsrepresentant for Høyre. Hun har også vært viseadministrerende direktør i NHO. Og kapteinen for det hele, for dette panelet, det er seniorrådgiver i Norad, Nikolai Hegertun. Han har forsket og skrevet om utviklingsspørsmål og norsk bistand i en årrekke. Velkommen til dere alle.
Takk for det, Asta. Ja, ulikhet og sosiale forskjeller, det er et ganske hyppig diskutert tema i både fagkretser, men også i politiske miljøer. Og med bevegelser som Occupy Wall Street og også etter hvert ganske tunge faglige bidrag som vi har fått i monn i senere år fra sist taler, Piketty, så har etter hvert problemstillingen knyttet til ulikhet tatt mer og mer plass på dagsorden, både i Norge og andre land. Samtidig ser vi nå at ulikhetsbegrepet rommer stadig flere ting og flere debatter, knyttet til for eksempel vaksiner, til utdanning, rettigheter og så videre. I tillegg til selvsagt inntektsfordeling, kapital og formue. Og det er også et stort spenn i debatten om ulikhet mellom land og innad i land. Og i tillegg så er det ofte sånn at debatten om ulikhet lett blander fag og politikk og ideologi. For det er litt ulike meninger om hva som driver ulikhet, hvor mye ulikhet som skal aksepteres, hva ulikhet gjør, og hvilke virkemidler vi har for å sette inn mot ulikhet. Så det jeg har lyst til å begynne med å spørre panelet om, er hva er egentlig ulikhet, sånn som dere ser det? Og da har jeg lyst til å starte med deg, Gry, og så tar vi Line, og så Kristin etter deg.
Ja, først takk for invitasjonen, og jeg er veldig glad for at dere løfter denne tematikken. For det mener vi i Norsk Folkehjelp er noe av det viktigste man snakker om nå, når vi snakker om utvikling. Debatter om ulikhet blir ofte litt teoretiske, det handler om tall og mål men for våre partnere rundt omkring i verden, så er ulikhet noe de føler på kroppen hver eneste dag. Mange land vi jobber i, er det ekstremt store forskjeller. Land som Colombia, Libanon, Sør-Afrika, så bor ekstremt fattige og ekstremt rike side ved side, ofte bare adskilt av piggtråd og alarmsystemer. Og det skaper ofte misnøye og uro, og det gjør det veldig vanskelig å utvikle trygge samfunn og stabile samfunn. Vi i Redd Barna har som hovedmål for alt vårt utviklingsarbeid å redusere ulikhet og skape en mer rettferdig fordeling av makt og ressurser. Og vår inngangsport til det er jobbe med sivilsamfunn rundt omkring i verden, jobbe med folkelige bevegelser. For de utfordrer urett de utfordrer myndighetene sine på ulikhet, og de krever politiske tiltak. Men vi ser jo at det en veldig farlig jobb, og den blitt enda farligere under pandemien, og den kombinasjonen av økende ulikhet og mindre demokrati ekstremt skummel og fører til uro og protester rundt omkring i verden. Og så ser vi jo at de sivilsamfunnspartene vi jobber med, de snakker jo ikke bare om økonomisk ulikhet, de opplever politisk ulikhet, de opplever sosial ulikhet, og for oss så gir ikke det gir ikke så mye mening bare å snakke om økonomisk ulikhet, fordi hvis du ikke snakker om makt, så går du ikke på en måte til kjernen av problemet. Våre partnere veldig opptatt av at har du økonomisk makt, så har du ofte politisk makt også. Eksempelsvis, jeg snakker om et grelt eksempel som Guatemala, hvor de økonomiske elitene har hatt enorm innflytelse også på de politiske rammene, har klart å forhindre utvikling av skattesystemer, og du står igjen med et land med en veldig svak stat, veldig mye sosial uro og sult i et mellominntektsland.
Ja. Takk for det. Vi skal komme mer inn på dette etter hvert også, men fra SAIH sitt ståsted, hvordan ser du på ulikhet?
Hvis jeg kan bygge litt videre på innledningen din og Grys poenger, så om vi skal ha ambisjoner om å gjøre noe med økonomisk ulikhet, så må vi i hvert fall ta inn over oss at ulikhet ikke bare økonomisk. Ulikhet ulikhet i makt, i stemme, i tilgang, i representasjon. Og den ulikheten eksisterer innad i land, den eksisterer mellom land, og den eksisterer også mellom oss som partnere i bistanden og det internasjonale arbeidet. Og konsekvensene av den ulikheten jo at den jo hverken blind eller tilfeldig. Den handler om maktubalanse, og noen som har interesse av og historie med å utøve makt, og grupper som har historisk sett også vært, om ikke maktesløse, så satt i posisjon hvor de ikke har mulighet til å bidra til å ta beslutninger og få bestemme hvordan penger i et land brukes, hvordan inntektene skapes og så videre. Og når vi skal, hele utgangspunktet for denne konferansen jo hvordan skal vi nå klare å gjøre dette skiftet, dette vendepunktet som må til for at vi skal komme på rett kjøl igjen, og som vi så innmari langt ute å kjøre i forhold til å nå bærekraftsmålene. Og da må i hvert fall utgangspunktet at det kan ikke være den samme gjengen som sitter og gjør det. Da får vi de samme gamle løsningene, det samme gamle tankegodset. Så vi må rett og slett gi tilgang, adgang, makt og myndighet til nye grupper mennesker, som blant annet våre partnere, som urfolksgrupper, som bygger universiteter, utvikler kunnskap, forsker der hvor de før i mange hundre år har blitt forsket på, nå utvikler og forsker fram et kunnskapsgrunnlag som kan være et alternativt kunnskapsgrunnlag da kanskje for å ta beslutninger på enn det vi har bak oss. Så selv om det lett å ønske at vi kunne gå for den der enkle, klare definisjonen av hva ulikhet så må vi nok forholde oss til at det ganske sammensett og klare å jobbe på alle de ulike frontene hvor vi opplever ulikhet.
Takk for det. Kristin Clemet, du kan få lov til å kommentere også ut fra ditt ståsted hvordan du ser på dette.
Når du stiller spørsmålet så åpent og spør hva ulikhet, så har jeg lyst til å være litt positiv også, fordi det former for ulikhet, et annet ord for ulikhet som vi bruker hver dag og stolt over det, jo mangfold. Så vi verdsetter jo ulikhet. Men når det har blitt så sentralt i den politiske debatten her, så det ulikhet i makt og ressurser vi tenker på. Økonomisk ulikhet. Og igjen, for å kaste inn litt positivt, så har det jo nå inntil pandemien vært en 30 års tid, hvor vi har sett at den økonomiske ulikheten innad i mange land har økt litt, og noen steder mye, mens den økonomiske ulikheten mellom land og regioner og mellom alle verdens mennesker faktisk har gått ned. Og det skyldes jo at mange fattige land har vokst mer enn rike land, og at mange fattige mennesker har blitt mindre fattige. Og det har jo vært veldig positivt inntil pandemien. Og så vil jeg jo si at når vi snakker om økonomisk ulikhet også, så ikke alt negativt ved det heller. Altså utsikter til økonomisk gevinst, det får mennesker til å anstrenge seg mer, til å ta risiko, satse sparepengene sine, kanskje gå lenger på skolen eller fullføre skolen og så videre. Så det er veldig mye positivt ved det også. Men så har det også noen negative sider. Og ofte når man skal diskutere hva er det som gjør ulikhet negativt og hva gjør det positivt, så ser man ofte på årsakene til at ulikheten oppstår. Og det er klart at i mange land, mange fattige land, så er det dårlige styringssystemer, det er mangel på demokrati, det kan være nepotisme, korrupsjon, privilegier og så videre, og det oppstår ulikhet av sånne grunner, og da er det jo negativt. Hvis det oppstår av grunner som folk flest opplever som rettferdige, så er det jo ikke nødvendigvis negativt. For å sette det litt på spissen, hvis jeg tjener mindre enn deg på grunn av min hudfarge, så er det veldig negativt. Det er noe jeg ikke kan gjøre noe med. Hvis jeg tjener mindre enn deg fordi jeg heller vil late meg på sofaen enn å jobbe enda jeg kan jobbe, så oppleves ikke det som så urettferdig. Så jeg vil si at bildet må nyanseres, men i denne sammenhengen så er det klart at man snakker om maktressurser, det er veldig mange ting, men jeg tror samtidig at hvis man skal gjøre godt i utviklingspolitikken og bistandspolitikken, så tror jeg det også er en fare knyttet til å prøve å konsentrere seg om alt på en gang. Og jeg tror personlig at det er viktigere å ha et blikk på fattigdomsreduksjon enn ulikhet i bistandspolitikken.
Vi kan spørre dere om det også da. Altså, selv om ingen liker sosiale forskjeller og for stor ulikhet og så videre, så er det noen ganger vanskelig å unngå. Altså, som Kristin Clemet sier her, så er jo ulikhet som stammer fra korrupsjon eller nepotisme og så videre. Diskriminering, det er jo ingen god ulikhet, men samtidig så har man jo eksempler på at industrialisering og sterk økonomisk vekst i fattige land leder til økt ulikhet, i hvert fall midlertidig. Og vi har jo også enkelte tiltak innenfor bistandspolitikken for eksempel, som har mye større effekt på fattigdomsreduksjon enn på ulikhet. Så spørsmålet er, skal man i noen tilfeller da må man tillate litt økt ulikhet i perioder, eller skal det være et generelt mål om å alltid redusere denne? Jeg kan begynne med deg, Line.
Jeg tenker jo det er trist da, hvis vi tenker at industrialiseringen vi ser fremover skal innebære at vi aksepterer ulikhet eller økt ulikhet, og den må jo se annerledes ut enn industrialiseringen på 1700-1800-tallet eller for noen 10 år siden. Og vi har jo også mye forskning som viser at ulikhet også virker negativt inn på økonomisk vekst. Og så har du jo, jeg representerer jo en menneskerettighetsorganisasjon, og ulikhet innebærer jo også ofte brudd på grunnleggende menneskerettigheter. Det er konsekvensen av ulikhet. Så jeg vil jo definitivt argumentere for at nei, vi skal ikke akseptere ulikhet som en del av den økonomiske veksten. Vi må ha mål om å jobbe fram en industrialisering, en økonomisk vekst som i mye større grad enn vi har lykkes med tidligere, klarer å gjøre det uten at vi ser disse store forskjellene.
Vil du kommentere på det, Ingrid?
Ja, jeg tenker jo at det har vel blitt tilbakevist ganske mange ganger at det er en automatikk at økonomisk vekst må medføre økt ulikhet. Blant annet Piketty, som vi akkurat hørte, har jobbet med det. Og vi ser jo at politiske tiltak virker. Det ser vi over hele verden. Fagorganisering har en effekt. Demokratisk mobilisering har en effekt. Det påvirker politikken. Det påvirker lønnssettelse. Så å gå inn i en sånn diskusjon om at at ulikhet må til, tenker jeg er helt feil. Altså, tvert imot så tror jeg at vi kunne få til å nå bærekraftsmålene mye raskere og redusere fattigdom mye raskere hvis vi har et fokus på å fordele makt og ressurser.
Ja. Kort kommentar fra Kristin før vi tar neste spørsmål.
Altså, jeg kjenner ikke til noe demokratisk samfunn som har absolutt likhet, så det er ulikhet, men det er veldig forskjell på nivået på ulikhet. Mange fattige land, udemokratiske land, så er det groteske forskjeller, og de stammer fra årsaker som vi vil betrakte som veldig urettferdige. Det noe helt annet, sånn at hvis man tenker seg at det oppstår en viss ulikhet i et fattig samfunn fordi man får til næringsutvikling og noen lykkes bedre enn andre, med det så det en helt annen form for ulikhet enn den som stammer fra korrupsjon eller nepotisme. Og jeg har lyst til å kaste litt sånn kaldt vann i blodet på oss også, fordi at Norge et av verdens likeste samfunn. Og de likeste samfunnene har ofte også den mest rettferdige ulikheten. Men hvordan ble vi det? Altså vi har blitt det over noen 100 år, ved at vi opprinnelig var et homogent, egalitært samfunn. Veldig høye tillitsnivåer. Veldig tidlig fikk vi en rettsstat som dannet grunnlag for at vi kunne inngå noen veldig viktige og velfungerende kontrakter. Vi kunne lage et veldig godt skattesystem, en velfungerende velferdsstat, en veldig velfungerende markedsøkonomi, trepartssamarbeid og så videre. Men dette har tatt oss 150-200 år. Og det ikke bare å overføre disse tingene til et hvilket som helst samfunn, tror jeg. Sånn at jeg tror ikke vi kan liksom greie oss å få til vekst i privat sektor og næringsutvikling i et fattig land og bidra til det, samtidig uten å akseptere at det en viss ulikhet. Jeg kan ikke se noe samfunn, altså vi vet jo at det var noen kommunistiske samfunn som prøvde å skape full likhet, det var jo ikke så veldig vellykket, men ellers så vet jeg ikke om noe demokratisk samfunn som, og jeg ser heller ikke det som et gode, full likhet. For skal du få full likhet, så må du antagelig ty til virkemidler som fjerner mye av friheten vår.
Ja. Vi skal bevege oss inn, du skal få kommentere på det, vi skal bevege oss inn i Norges rolle i dette, og i norsk bistandspolitikk, fordi noe av grunnen til at global ulikhet har blitt redusert, altså mellom land i senere år, som du sa, jo at store folkerike land har beveget seg fra lavinntektsland opp i mellominntektsnivå, men så det sånn at mange av disse store mellominntektslandene huser jo fortsatt veldig mange fattige, og også noen av de ekstremfattige. Så ulikhet internt i disse landene den veldig høy da. Men skal Norge jobbe med mellominntektsland for eksempel, i norsk bistand, fordi vi føler at vi kanskje sitter da, på noen gode løsninger hva gjelder omfordeling og egalitære styringsprinsipper og så videre. Eller skal vi jobbe da med de aller fattigste landene, der kanskje omfordeling ikke like relevant fordi kaken i utgangspunktet såpass liten. Dette egentlig et spørsmål om hvorfor ulikhet viktig i norsk bistand, og hvordan skal vi jobbe med tematikken? Du kan begynne, eller?
Jeg har så lyst til å bare ha en kort kommentar til Kristin, for jeg tror bare så det ikke blir en skinndebatt heller, så det jo, jeg helt enig med deg, det ingen som tror jeg jobber for, eller har en illusjon om en full likhet. Men der hvor vi jobber, og de landene og den problematikken vi diskuterer nå, handler jo om land hvor det en enorm og uønsket likhet, ikke sant? Så de tiltakene og det vi bidrar til, tenker jeg må ha som mål, og også bidra til mindre ulikhet. Og så handler det om, hvor skal vi da jobbe? Der hvor Norge har altså noe å bidra med. Jeg tror jo ikke vi har så mye å bidra med hvis vi tror at vi på en måte kan replikere det vi har gjort. Altså det var jo under helt andre forhold. Vi får ikke satt opp den der eksperimentkassa og prøve å utvikle liksom andre land, sånn som Norge utviklet seg til dette samfunnet vi kjenner. Så det må jo være et helt annet bud på hvordan land skal bli land som respekterer menneskerettigheter, hvor det mindre ulikhet og i det hele tatt. Og jeg tror jo jeg har mer lyst til å snakke om hvilke krefter det vi skal støtte i ulike land, og jeg tror jo at vi må jobbe i land hvor det store demokrati- og menneskerettighets- og ulikhets- og fattigdomsutfordringer. Det både i land som i kategori med fattigland og i mellominntektsland, og jeg tror det spiller virkelig en rolle hvem det vi støtter. Vi må tørre å støtte de kreftene som reformvilje, som kritiske, og som tør å ta risiko, altså den risikoen som Gry snakket om i sted. Altså, vi har jo partnere som risikerer liv og død i denne kampen for tilgang og rettferdighet hver eneste dag. Jeg fikk beskjed i dag morges fra mine kolleger som i Colombia nå, om at en av våre partnere ble drept for noen timer siden. Og det jo i kamp for rettigheter, urfolksrettigheter i Colombia. Så jeg tror vi må se på hvem vi støtter, og jeg tror også det interessant å diskutere liksom tiden for disse enorme initiativene, hvor vi tror hvis vi bare liksom jobber med infrastruktur, eller hvis vi bare jobber med helse, tror det skal vi kanskje konferansen senere i dag også se på disse mikroinitiativene, at vi kanskje må gjøre litt og mindre skritt på flere områder det som tar oss lengst.
Men det er en lang vei å gå da. Altså det er også noe som Lars Loe, kollega som la frem rapport her i sted, sa at det er en veldig viktig I rapporten så legger han veldig vekt på politisk vilje og styresett som en veldig viktig faktor for å gjøre noe med ulikhet i land der hvor det er et stort problem. Da. Men det er jo det er krevende, ikke minst.
Altså det er nesten umulig, vil jo noen si, det kritikerne si, men vi ser jo resultater. Altså vi som jobber med det vet jo at du kan gå alle disse små skrittene, og ting hadde sett fryktelig mye dårligere ut hvis vi ikke alle disse årene hadde jobbet for den endringen.
Kristin skal få kommentere, og så tar du...
Jeg bare si at nå har vi jo drevet med bistand i verden i 60-70 år, og vi har jo ikke akkurat nådd de målene som mange har håpet og trodd og hatt ambisjoner om. Det er veldig mange gode resultater, men det er også mange resultater som har uteblitt. Og jeg som står litt utenfor bistandsbransjen, synes at det er viktig å huske på det som jeg trodde i hvert fall var kjernen i bistanden, nemlig hjelp til selvhjelp. Altså at disse landene skal jo utvikle seg selv, men vi kan gi et bidrag som hjelp til selvhjelp. Og da tenker jeg at et par ting som jeg synes er veldig viktig personlig, veldig viktig, infrastruktur. Jeg har selv hatt gleden av å sitte i styret i Nord for noen år og bidra til infrastruktur, altså det at man bygger ut energi, fornybar energi da, og at man bygger ut en finansiell infrastruktur, sånn at vi kan få næringsutvikling og jobbskaping, som er ekstremt viktig. Og så er jeg selv også veldig engasjert i utdanning, det å lage kvalitativt gode utdanningssystemer. Men igjen, det er jo ikke noe vi kan gi dem og finansiere på varig basis, det er jo noe som disse landene selv må ha interesse av å bygge opp, men det å da etablere mekanismer som gjør at du så å si belønnes for å satse på utdanning, det tror jeg kan være veldig viktig. Og det er jo vanskelig fordi utdanning er jo typisk noe som du ikke ser for avkastning av i gåseøyne før på 20, 30, 40, 50 år. Så det er vanskelig når du sitter og er finansminister i et fattig land å prioritere det, men det er ekstremt viktig.
Men du er ikke en representant for NGO-ene her, men du er jo samtidig leder av en tenketak, og du er jo glad i sivilsamfunnet, og synes ikke du også det er viktig å støtte opp under sivilsamfunn i samfunn som, eller i hvert fall sivilsamfunnsbevegelser som ønsker å endre på veldig svært ulike eller maktforhold som er svært ulike, for eksempel?
Jo, altså problemet i bistand som jeg oppfatter er at det er nesten, altså alt virker viktig. Problemet er bare at mitt inntrykk er at når vi får en ny utviklings- eller bistandsminister, så kommer de med sine hjertebarn, og så tar man ikke vekk når man legger på noe mer på toppen, og til slutt så er det så mange formål at for meg så virker det litt sånn at hvis man prøver å gå etter alt, så risikerer man ikke går godt nok etter noe.
Gry, du skulle få kommentere også på det.
Ja, der er vi veldig enige egentlig, fordi at det er jo litt av det problemet vi ser også, at det kommer norske politikere inn med sine hjertebarn som de vil investere, og de varierer, og det er tematiske prioriteringer, mens selv til selvhjelp er jo egentlig å støtte opp om folks egne agendaer for endring, og støtte opp under de som kan presse på myndighetene, mobilisere, engasjere befolkningen, få et demokratisk samfunn på plass, der du faktisk kan presse gjennom endringer som du definerer selv. Vår agenda går veldig mye på hva er det vi vil at de skal gjøre, eller hva er det vi vil gjøre i bistanden, mens vi burde gjøre mye mer hvis vi skal jobbe med intern ulikhet i land, med å se på hva er det folk selv mener skal til for å få til endring, og hvordan kan vi støtte dem i den kampen for endring.
Jeg har lyst til å stille, vi nærmer oss slutten, men jeg har lyst til å stille dere et spørsmål på slutten, litt mer konkret også, ikke bare hvem vi skal støtte og så videre. For i Norge og en del europeiske land så vet vi ganske godt hva som driver ulikhet og sosiale forskjeller, og vi vet også en del om hva som skal til for å gjøre noe med det. Altså vi kan føre en debatt da, med et ganske høyt presisjonsnivå, fordi vi har utredninger, vi har forskning og så videre, vi har gode registerdata blant annet og så videre, men vi vet alt fra liksom, barnehagesektoren, hvor viktig det er, arbeidsmarkedet, Nav, skattepolitikk og så videre. Når vi løfter dette opp til globale spørsmål og bistand, som ulikhet har slått inn i det, så er det jo ofte et ganske mye høyere abstraksjonsnivå på den debatten, og vi har ikke et like godt kunnskapsgrunnlag. Så da lurer jeg på, vet vi helt konkret hvilke konkrete tiltak vi bør eller sette i gang for å gjøre noe med ulikhet, og hvor skulle vi i så fall begynt? Linn?
Nei, jeg tror hvis noen hadde kunnet svart deg klart på det, så det hadde vært kjempefint. Men der vi ikke helt. Det heller ikke one magic bullet, jeg sikker på, som skal til. Men hvis jeg på en måte skulle velge en sånn inngang, så det, jeg tror vi enige om at bistand virker, men ikke all bistand. Og vi vet ganske mye om hva som har virket til nå, og så må vi jo teste og finne ut hva det vi tror kan virke fremover. Og jeg tror heller ikke, som Kristin var inne på, bistand til utdanning helt nødvendig. Men hvordan den bistanden til utdanning foregår, den kan vi justere masse. Og det vi i hvert fall vet, at selv om kanskje store globale fond kan være effektive for å få pengene flyttet fra store donorer og til land, så jo ingenting så politisk som utdanning. Så hvordan pensum blir, hvem som underviser, hvordan et land faktisk velger å sette opp sitt utdanningssystem, hva de forsker på, hvilken kunnskap man faktisk velger å produsere om ulikheter, om situasjonen i det landet som skal danne grunnlag for de politiske beslutninger som tas der. Det mener jeg helt nødvendig å fortsette å satse på. Og da må du også bruke penger på de som kjemper seg makt for å komme frem til bordet. Og den der saying om at if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu, tenker jeg liksom greit å ha med seg inn i dette.
Greit. Da får 30 sekunder til Kristin og 30 sekunder til deg til slutt.
Jeg vil bare si at jeg tror i fattige land så virker god utdanning og jobbskaping, det virker der som her for å redusere ulikhet eller forebygge økt ulikhet. Men det en ting som også veldig viktig, og som vanskeligere å komme med fra utsiden, og det solide rettsstater. Altså det at vi har en rettsstat, det skaper mye større rettferdighet, både i økonomien, i velferdsstaten vår, altså i alle livets forhold, og det likhetsfremmende. Og det kan jo ikke alle land skryte på seg at de har da.
Gry, vær så god.
Jeg tenker at det jo, hvis du skal få noen endring på ulikhet, så må det gjennomsyre alt det vi gjør. Så vi vil jo anbefale at vi får en stortingsmelding på ulikhet i bistanden. Og vi anbefaler at for eksempel, vi jobber med opp mot Verdensbanken, FN-systemet, det burde også da gjennomsyre den deltagelsen og støtten som vi gir, at det vi må på en måte promotere at den bistanden som gis har en ulikhetsreduserende virkning. Og vi mener jo også at det må for eksempel inn i næringslivssatsingen, som vi på en måte tar litt som for gitt at skal ha en ulikhetsreduserende effekt, men det har ikke det hvis man ikke setter noen klare krav.
Tusen hjertelig takk. Svært tema, men det var det vi rakk. Tusen takk for at dere kom.
Ja, jeg synes dere rakk mye. Tusen takk for en veldig engasjerende og klok samtale. Gry Ballestad, Line Hegna, Kristin Clemet og samtaleleder Nikolai Hegertun. Og han kommer tilbake om litt for å lede et annet spennende panel som kommer i neste bolk under temaet fra kull til null utslipp. Eller for å være mer presis, from coal to zero emissions, challenges and solutions for developing countries. Men før det tar vi en god pause. Vi ses klokka 11. Welcome back. Welcome back to the 2022 Norad conference. The previous session was all about poverty and inequality. Now, we'll be tackling climate change and the need for a global energy transmission. To give us an overview, Director General of Norad, Bård Vegar Solhjell, is back.
Thank you. Great to be back with you. Energy is the very foundation of the modern world. From transport to production to cooking food for your family, even managing a society through a pandemic. Everything requires energy. In 1709, Abraham Darby discovered how to smelt iron ore using a purified form of coal. And since, coal and later oil and gas have become the major energy source globally. Production and use of fossil energy is by far the dominant source of CO2 emissions. And that is why the global energy transition from fossil to renewable energy is the dominant climate solution. In many developing countries, and specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, the challenge in the decades to come is a double challenge. The first is access, because energy isn't for everyone. Globally, at least 700 million people, or approximately 800 million people, do not have access to electricity. About 600 million of them live in sub-Saharan Africa. At the same time, the continent's population is booming, and with it, the use of energy. The International Energy Agency projects a doubling of energy use on the continent by 2040. So for Africa, increased access to energy is essential. The second channel is what kind of energy that will be offered. If we are to have any chance of meeting the goals set out in the Paris Agreement, we cannot rely on fossil fuel to meet the future energy needs of the African continent, like any continent. The most obvious solution is not in front of us, it's above us. And it also shows or serves to show what I call the African solution paradox. Long term, almost every focus point in the same direction. Solar energy will be the dominant source of energy in the energy mix by 2100. We are in the solar century, and 40% of the global potential for solar energy is on the African continent. Still today, only 1.3% of installed energy is in Africa. Actually, the United Kingdom, you know, the island where the weather is always cloudy and grey, has more installed capacity than the whole of the African continent. So Africa is the continent of the future when it comes to renewable energy, but it is not the continent of the present. And that's where Norad and so many others come in. By using grants to support investments in energy and energy systems, we can contribute to a real Vendepunkt, an energy game changer. Norad supports guarantee measures to increase investments in renewable energy. An example is the Norwegian company Empower, which has invested in solar to cover the energy use of the Ghanaian company Miniplast, which I visited myself. This year, we will also be creating and implementing the program Energy for Development for the Norwegian government, a program to support institutions that are vital for a functioning energy system. And there is an enormous need for clean cooking solutions. At least 2.5 billion people worldwide cook over open fire. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, firewood is fetched from the forests, and firewood alone makes up 20% of the deforestation. This has a devastating effect on people's health. Close to 4 million people, including almost 400,000 children under 5, die from indoor pollution every year. This is not new, but new solutions that you will hear about soon bring hope of a game changer. Whether for clean cooking or kickstarting solar initiatives, we want to spend more of our resources in a way that can catalyze private capital to this double challenge in the future. And that's what this part of today's program is about, game-changing energy solutions. Norad has entered into a cooperation with the International Energy Agency to explore solutions to the African double energy challenge. Better access, clean energy.
Better access, clean energy. Thank you, Bård Vegar Solhjell. So, no wonder the next topic is Africa Energy Outlook 2022. And in his introduction, Mr. Solhjell mentioned the cooperation with the International Energy Agency. And today, we're pleased to have Executive Director Fatih Birol with us. He's been named by Forbes magazine as one of the most influential people on the world's energy scene. He chairs the World Economic Forum's Energy Advisory Board and serves on the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Sustainable Energy for All. Dr. Birol will be speaking on how Africa can decarbonize and join the global energy transition. Afterwards, he will engage in conversation with Elisabeth Clemens, head of the section for energy in NORAD's Department for Climate and Environment. Dr. Fatih Birol, we're glad to have you here. Welcome.
Very many thanks for inviting me to your event, and greetings to our Norwegian colleagues and all the other colleagues, friends following this event across the world. Thank you very much from the International Energy Agency headquarters in Paris. So I am very happy to join you to talk about Africa energy, clean energy, reaching our global and regional climate goals. But before that, I wanted to register something. At the IEA, we work on energy access over 2 decades, almost 22 years. And the first step of this journey to work on energy access has started in cooperation with NORAD. So I wanted to take NORAD for this long-term relationship between IEA and themselves. Now, when we look at this issue, more than 20 years ago, there are 1.7 billion people who had no access to electricity. And when we look at the numbers today, it is more than halved. And there are some very good examples. We have seen China, for example, huge success story in China, followed by India. India recently, in 2019, is now almost 100% full electrification. And also Bangladesh, the major achievement as well. There are many good news. Still, when I remember 20 years ago, a map we made for our slides, where are the problems? It was China, it was in India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. The problem with Sub-Saharan Africa remains. It is now the center of access. 1 out of 2 people in 21st century has no access to electricity. Of course, it is not acceptable. And this is one of the 2 hallmarks of energy poverty. And the other one is, of course, not having access to modern cooking devices. So this is definitely a very worrying trend. 1 out of 2 people having no access in Africa. And this has not only implications for energy, but economy, social life, political stability, as it goes on and on and on. So with the when we look at the trend in Africa, in fact, we are following year by year. Since 2013, we've been seeing a rather declining of energy access numbers. This is very good. More and more people would have access to energy. The lack of electricity numbers were declining, a very good trend. But with the COVID, we have seen it is now reversed, bad news. So looking at these issues, we have thought at the IEA, let's make a new Africa energy outlook. This was our plan, and I was very happy that our colleagues in NORAD gave us a hand here. In this Africa Energy Outlook, we are working together with the African Union Commission as well as UNECA, but also we have in several African countries, we have 20 experts on the ground giving us a lot of support and are able, working job, the team is conducting this work. So what do we want to do with this work? We want to come up with recommendations, concrete policy suggestions, especially focusing on the next 10 years. How we can achieve universal electricity access and clean cooking by 2030. This is number one. Number two, how we can have the African countries can reach their NDC goals, climate goals, while we are seeing about 50% of increase in the economy in those countries. So how do we fulfill these two major conditions? The access to energy and making it clean, reaching our climate goals while the economy is growing. This is very important for the International Energy Agency, while the economy is growing, while the prosperity of the African people are increasing. Now, my colleagues are working on the report. The report will come mid this year. But when I look at the report, if I have to pick up 2-3 points I wanted to share with you, which I think are critical. What is the fault line of reaching these targets in Africa? Having Africa with a full access to energy, economy is growing, and energy is clean. This is the investment. Investment in clean energy is, for me, the fault line of the entire energy question in Africa. According to our numbers, when I look at the current clean energy investment trends, they have to increase by a factor of 5 if we were to reach this our targets that the World Energy Outlook puts together. And of course, there are major challenges here. One of them I can tell you, the cost of capital. Cost of capital in Africa is about 7 times higher than, for example, in the Western markets. So, which is definitely not a good news to get the private capital. And I'm going to Egypt in a few weeks of time, having meetings with the president, government officials, and so on. And Egypt is this year holding the COP27 presidency. I will tell my Egyptian colleagues, I'm sure you will get a lot of suggestions. Please put this under your list, this priority, that priority. My main suggestion to them, I'm sure they will look at a list of issues, and some of them will come from COP26, from Glasgow. Some of them will be passed to COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. But if I was Egypt, I would put how we can achieve mobilizing clean energy investment in Africa as the #1 priority, looking at our numbers as it is an enabler. The solar, huge potential. Wind, huge potential. Hydropower, huge potential. The hydropower capacity today in entire sub-Saharan Africa is as much as what you have in your beautiful country of Norway. The Director General gave a very good example on solar that we have been saying since some time. He mentioned UK, but I'll give you another number. Just think of the world map. Okay, Belgium, Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, where you have the 40% of the global solar potential, and the solar power capacity in Belgium is about 50% higher than the entire Sub-Saharan Africa put together. It is incredible. It is one of the most tragic numbers I ever witnessed in the energy world. Huge solar potential, Second, very cheap. And third, as we said several times, half of the continent has no access to power. So therefore, solar is very important together with the others. But also, I want to note that in our report, we will also keep an eye on another issue, another potential that Africa has a lot for the immediate and the longer-term future, which is the critical minerals, which are very important for the clean energy transition. Electric cars, windmills, solar panels, and so on. Africa is very rich there. And we will also, in our report, not only the electricity part of the energy poverty issue, but we will also look at the issue of the clean cooking, where we analyze the role of LPG in detail. So to sum up our report, thanks to the support of Norad and in good cooperation with the African Union Commission and UNECA, is coming mid this year with concrete suggestions on the access to energy 2030, full access to energy by 2030. And the second, while the economy prospers, how we can make sure that the choice of the government's utilities are the clean energy sources, and putting a lot of discussion on the nerve center of the problem, how to mobilize clean energy investments in sub-Saharan Africa. Once again, many thanks to you for inviting me here, and moreover, many thanks to Norad for the great cooperation. Thank you.
Dr. Barol, again, welcome to the Norad conference, and thank you for presenting the initial findings from the upcoming report. To start off our conversation, I'd like to ask why the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, one of the most influential people according to the Times 100 list, is taking the time to talk to us today about increasing access to energy in developing countries.
Why do I take the time to talk about Africa? Because it is the most important thing in my job today, yesterday, and tomorrow. So, in fact, when I became many Norwegian colleagues know, when I became the head of the IEA in 2015, I made a major change in the IEA strategy under the motto of opening the doors of the IEA to emerging and developing world. As a result of that, the International Energy Agency, which has been having the members only from Europe, North America, and Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, is in the last few years, we have many new member governments of the IEA family, ranging from Africa to Brazil, from Brazil to Indonesia, from India to Colombia, Mexico, and others. So this is one thing. And the second thing is, again, going to Norad. I remember exactly 22 years ago, I was in a conference, again, one of the big summits. People were talking about millions of people have no access to electricity. The other person says it is a major problem for the humanity that so many people have no access to electricity. Then I thought myself, at that time I was the head of the World Energy Outlook team at the IEA, and we were only 5 people in the entire World Energy Outlook team. And I thought myself, if the world takes this issue seriously, first we have to measure it. What is this millions? What is this so many people? And I wanted to start a project to every year to see how many people have access to electricity and how many don't, and next year what changed in which country. And of course, we didn't have resources, and I went to Norad. I knew their work, and a good friend of mine at that time working for Norad, Petter Norre, I said, Petter, can we get some support from you, from Norad, to start with a project like this? And he was kind enough to, through Norad, to support us, and since 22 years, International Agency every year takes this as a priority, and country by country, we are looking at how many people have access to electricity. And now, if those numbers are around, from the UN Secretary General to the presidents, the CEOs, thought leaders, economists around the world, if they are using these numbers, this is thanks to the great support of Norad at that time. These numbers are used and produced by many people now, which is a very good news. But I want to see Africa even going beyond being in the international fora. I was telling another colleague the other day, because we are working with several G20 countries. This year with Indonesia, next year with Italy, next year with India, last year with Italy. I was always thinking, I'm very happy to see many European colleagues and the European Commission there, and why not making G20 from G20 to G21, and having the African Union being a part of this debate. I thought it would be very good to have the African leaders becoming the part of the major international fora today. So these are some thoughts about Africa and some memories, good memories with Norad, and once again, very many thanks for all your support.
So we're a little less than 8 years away from 2030, by which time we should reach universal energy access. And we'll focus on cooking in a little bit, but first on to the electricity. And as you mentioned, we need to measure it. And according to the IEA data, around 150 million people gained access in Africa over the past decade. And we need to increase this rate by almost 5 times in the next 8 years to provide an additional 710 million people with access. Now, how do we achieve this? And how can limited grant funding from agencies like Norad most effectively mobilize renewable energy, which you also said initially is just so critical in this topic?
First of all, I believe Africa, when we look at the development, economic development history of different parts of the world, when you look at, for example, Europe, America, China, they had different phases of their economic development fueled by different sources of energy, and they all went through a phase of coal-driven economic growth. This Europe, the US, and recently China. Africa may well skip that phase, and why? Because they have a lot of other sources, and second, those sources are very, very cheap, and therefore I see it will be coming. Now, we have the potential, a renewable potential, and we have the political will in many, if not all, African countries to make most out of this potential, bringing electricity and the clean cooking to their citizens. What is missing is the right policies at home and international support for this journey to bring the lots of solar, wind, hydropower, and other energy sources. Maybe natural gas in some countries to power their economies. So the missing link here is the investments. As I mentioned before, the cost of capital is very high. Therefore, we need certain instruments here. And one of them is, in my view, the most important one, in my view, the MDBs, the Market Development Banks, in my view, should clean energy investment as a #1 priority in their lending processes. It is not like that now. And I urge all the governments who are in the boards of those organizations to make sure that this is a key priority. And also there are also organizations like Norad, and I think your support will be also important in terms of being a catalyst for the private money. Of course, keeping an eye on the governance issues there, it will be critical. So I see two big players here to address this fault line of the problem, which is the mobilizing clean energy investments. One, domestic right policies, putting the policies there, and the second, the international support, ranging from the multilateral development banks to the bilateral and the aid institutions such as Norad, in order to playing a catalyst role to get the investments there. If we can de-risk those investments, the potential is huge because demand will grow. The resources are there, and if we can de-risk those investments through these instruments, it will be definitely very, very good news.
Thank you. Now, the EU recently announced that natural gas, you just touched upon it, may be considered a transitional green energy. But given the climate crisis that we're facing, not everyone is supportive of financing new fossil fuel infrastructure. Could you elaborate just a little bit more on what you see the role of fossil fuels in sub-Saharan Africa to be?
Of course. Now, first of all, I want to make something clear. The Europeans, Americans, Japanese, I don't know, the developed countries, the Africa's contribution to the cumulative CO2 emissions is less than 2%, almost nothing. So we have to put this everything in a context, first of all, this is number one. And number two, Africa's top priority is economic development. And when we have all these cheap renewable energy sources, ranging from solar, the most important one, to hydropower, onshore wind, offshore wind, in some cases geothermal, they are all. We have to make the most out of this. But there may be some areas that the countries may well use natural gas for fueling their economic growth. Nobody can convince me, to be honest with you. Nobody can convince me that in Mozambique they are forbidden to use natural gas, where the huge part of the population have no access to electricity and they have just natural gas resources. Of course they should use, but they should do it in a way that they should know that it is, I'm talking about other countries, not only Mozambique, the infrastructure should be built in a way that it will not be long-lived, first of all. Secondly, a big problem in Africa, many countries, is that methane emissions need to be minimized, if not nullified. And third, this infrastructure should be, whatever we build there, should be ready for using repurposing, for example, hydrogen and others. So in this context, there may be ways to make use of natural gas. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't link to the EU or other. EU is different. Africa is different. Africa needs economic growth. And nobody, including the IEA or this organization, that organization, shouldn't tell Africa, use this, don't use this. Of course, we can give some suggestions. But again, if Mozambique has, I just give Mozambique as an example, there's a huge amount of people who have no access to electricity. And next door, if they have their own natural gas resources, of course, they should make the most out of it. With consideration of the things I mentioned to you, the hydrogen, methane emissions, and the limited years of infrastructure investments there. But I should mention that the coal is out of question, and we are leaving coal behind us anyways. coal is, from economic point of view, even from economic point of view, it is not a good investment in Africa at all. And perhaps I should mention one more thing. I'm just remembering now, the LPG. So LPG is a critical one, especially when it comes to clean cooking. I think we should not forget the LPG, which can also help to improve the quality of life of many Africans and Asians and Latin Americans as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Broll. You just transitioned now over to the topic of cooking, and indeed 2.5 billion people in the world lack access to modern energy to prepare their meals. Dr. Broll, how important is this part of the SDG 7 to you? And can you describe a little bit more how you think is the best way to achieve that?
Thank you. This is also a very great topic, because even in the excess discussions around the world, the overwhelming attention of excess is focusing on the electricity, which is very important. But there is also this clean cooking. And clean cooking, again, a topic that IEA has been working since 2 decades. My colleague Lara Kozzi would remember my discussions with her since many years. She is our chief energy modeler, who is in charge of this our Africa work. Now, when we look at the clean cooking, it's a matter of mainly the issue of women and children. And it is one of the top 3 reasons for premature deaths around the world. In most of the countries, especially in Africa, because of the respiratory diseases it causes. Second, many women, not only they are badly affected health-wise, losing a lot of time to collect wood to bring home and for cooking. Now, I was thinking, there is you mentioned Europe, there is a lot of discussion in Europe, which I fully agree, how many women should be represented in the boards of the companies, which is very good. We have to increase it. We are trying to do it in the IEA. We are not better at all at the IEA. Today, the 50% of the IEA staff now, as of today, is women, 50% men. But I was thinking, there is a lot of attention there, rightly so, in these issues. Why there is not enough attention? African women losing a lot of time to collect wood, therefore deprived from the social life, therefore deprived from the economic life, deprived from the education opportunities, and collecting wood, and being exposed to this health issue. So therefore, I think this is a key issue. It's a gender issue, in my view, as important as the number of women, how many companies have women executives in their boards, as important as that. And there are many suggestions we come in our work, but the LPG is a very good, one of the very good ways to address this issue, providing clean cooking purposes. I suggest many colleagues to follow what happened in India, the Ujjwala program in India. I think they have a very successful program there in India, and many countries may well get inspiration from that. So this will be one of the key topics in our forthcoming report in Africa Energy Outlook, how to provide clean cooking in the best way meaning providing support for the women and children for their economic and social lives, and at the same time providing the least cost options, but at the same time providing the economic growth.
Dr. Broll, thank you so much for sharing your insights today on the challenges of combating climate change and achieving sustainable energy for all. And of course, we look forward to the IEA's report on Africa's energy outlook to be published in the second quarter of this year.
Thank you very much for.
Yes, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, Fatih Birol and Elizabeth Clements. This was an inspiring conversation. So we're happy Elizabeth will also be staying with us to moderate the next panel on innovation and growth in the energy sector. And What a panel. Hanan Marwa is CFO of Circle Gas and has 20 years of experience in mergers, acquisitions, and private equity. Since 2012, she's focused on the African energy sector, not least as board member of the National Electricity Utility of Cameroon, ENEO, and the power company of Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Vilde Grønn Larsen is a senior vice president of Eksfin. As part of the team Renewable Energy and Industry, SME and Midcorp, she works primarily with transactions in Africa and other emerging markets. She also has wide international experience spanning finance and accounting. In the panel is also Xavier Pierluca, managing partner of Enabling Capital. As a global investment professional, he's structured and raised several funds in access to energy, microfinance, fintech, SME finance, and healthcare. So, finally, the panel welcomes CEO and founder of Burn Manufacturing and the founder of Burn Design Lab, Peter Scott. In 2010, he was chosen as one of the top 100 global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine. He's also recognized as a global leader in cook stove commercialization. So, take a look at this.
To be a mother, surely, you must make sure your family is safe. Your kids get proper education. Your family eat properly. This is my 6th year of using G-Cocoa. It is very safe. When I light it, the smoke very reduced. I'm spending a quarter of the money compared to the old stove. You can buy books. You can maybe take your kids for a trip they can enjoy. Yeah, and that's a health family. I think so. It will help. I really like it.
Hanan Marwa, you represent Circle Gas, a company founded about 3 years ago with more than 150,000 customers. Peter Scott, you have founded and developed the company Burn, headquartered in Kenya, which has become one of the largest companies in the clean cooking sector. Can you please tell us about your motivation to engage in this sector and the companies that you represent? And let's please start with Hanan.
Talking about the issues of clean cooking and really the statistic that stands out most to me is that more people die each year from indoor air pollution caused by AIDS from clean cooking, from the lack of access to clean cooking, than die from AIDS, malaria, and TB combined. The lack of access to clean cooking is really one of the great intractable problems, development problems of our age. And of course, the trade in charcoal is a major driver of deforestation. And we know, it's already been mentioned, how many people around the world are stuck in this terrible situation. My own background is that I came from the electricity sector, which has already been mentioned on this as being an urgent development priority. I've been working with investment funds that focus on electricity distribution. And I never thought about clean cooking as an area where there could be promising companies, commercially viable companies. I always thought it was a bit of a no-hoper industry and probably not something that I could ever get involved in. And then I heard about Circle Gas, a pay-as-you-go LPG distribution company that's backed by the Kenyan mobile telephone company Safaricom. And honestly, I'd never thought about LPG as being really the solution to this problem. But as Dr. Brohl mentioned, it is increasingly clear that it is a major part of how to achieve clean cooking around the world. I realized when I came across Circle Gas that there were 4 things that had changed recently, which really opened up the possibility for a sustainable commercial proposition to expanding clean cooking access. Cooking with gas, a clean burning fuel, is in many countries reserved for the rich and middle classes. It's a highly aspirational fuel and people want to use it, but in many cases cannot afford to cook with gas, which is actually cheaper in many markets, but they cannot afford the cost of the upfront equipment. However, the 4 things that have changed are, number 1, the widespread use of mobile money. Number 2, the invention of the pay-as-you-go smart meter for gas. Number 3, supportive government policy, which helps open up the price difference between clean and dirty fuels. And 4th, the fast growth of dense urban populations. The combination of these 4 things mean that a pay-as-you-go gas cooking business targeted at urban areas is now viable. Those trapped in poverty who could not otherwise afford a gas cylinder can now pay for gas 1 meal at a time. At Circle Gas, we are committed to fighting climate change, and we are in the process of registering carbon credits generated by our business, because when a customer moves from cooking with charcoal to cooking with gas, there is a significant reduction in net emissions. For our customers, gas is the only scalable way for them to access clean cooking, and our goal is to expand that access as much as possible until a fully renewable fuel source is available. Lack of access to clean cooking, as Dr. Brohl mentioned, primarily affects women and children. And I believe this is one of the reasons that it has been such a neglected area compared to, say, electricity access. So this has been a huge personal motivation for me. Thank you.
That's great, Hanan. Thank you. And what about you, Peter and Bern?
It's a great pleasure to be here and glad that the world is looking at clean cooking solutions. I've spent my whole adult life working on clean cooking. So when I was 20 and I went to DRC, I saw deforestation in Congo and got down on my knees and cried and said I would commit my life to saving forests across the world. So jump forward to 2010 and I launched Burn Design Lab and Burn Manufacturing to really design the world's most fuel efficient biomass stoves and then to manufacture those locally. So since 2010, Burn has become, seems like it's breaking a little bit. Are you guys still getting me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, good. I'm in the factory, and so sometimes the connection's a little bit bad. So we have now become the largest cook stove company in the world. We've produced and sold over 1.2 million units. And I think, and so now we're on track to really scale and actually do over 1.2 million units this year alone. So we make about 70,000 units a month now. By the middle of this year, we'll do 200,000 units a month. By the end of this year, we'll do 400,000 units a month. So it's really, we're in an incredible growth phase for the sector and for Burn. And so I think it's interesting, you know, for a long time, the clean cook stove sector was seen as being sort of problematic or dysfunctional. You know, Hannah alluded to that that it seemed like even though there was this huge need and huge opportunity, no one had really had addressed it. But we've had a number of independent studies of burn stoves that said, one $40 burn stove can have $1,000 of benefit to society when you add up the carbon benefit, the household savings, the reduction in health costs. So it's an incredible IRR for a country as well as for a household. So one household might have a benefit of 296% IRR increase. So burn kind of built itself on biomass stoves, but the real future is in electric. And so that is the exciting opportunity. People often talk about the lack of electric access on the continent, but the reality is urban markets have very high access to electricity. And cooking with electricity is actually the cheapest form of cooking on the continent, so cheaper than LPG, charcoal, wood, paraffin. So the real opportunity in the future is going to be on electric, and that will be supported by carbon, by pay-as-you-go. So we're very excited to roll out a whole new line of not just biomass, but also electric.
Really interesting indeed. So obviously, financing to grow newly founded companies like yourselves is critical. So in this upcoming film, we will see how barriers to financing could potentially be addressed from a new fund.
Today, 900 million people in Africa still use inefficient stoves and fuels for cooking, leading to 700,000 premature deaths, forest degradation, and climate change. Meeting the UN's Sustainable Development Goals will require reaching the long elusive goal of bringing access to clean cooking for all. Fortunately, clean cooking solutions are becoming more affordable, in demand by consumers, and commercially viable due to innovative new technologies and business models. At the same time, Africa's clean cooking market is still nascent, and reaching the SDGs by 2030 will require a quantum leap in investments for developing, testing, and scaling new business models. We won't be able to bridge this investment gap through public funding alone. Attracting more private financing is required to build a vibrant clean cooking market. This calls for new and creative uses of blended finance that can stimulate private sector investment. As a response to this challenge, 4 years ago, the Clean Cooking Alliance set out to develop a fund that would blend capital from pension funds and other commercial investors, with concessional capital from development institutions, and in doing so, serve as a model for future investment vehicles. With a market opportunity-driven strategy, the Spark Plus Fund would deploy primarily debt, but also equity and quasi-equity instruments to fill a critical gap in the financing landscape. Spark Plus would take a value chain approach, finding enterprises that manufacture, distribute, and finance clean cooking solutions across sub-Saharan Africa. We partnered with Enabling Capital, an impact fund manager with a track record in microfinance and off-grid energy, and together we assembled a stellar team that would structure, fundraise, and ultimately manage this pioneering fund. It is with great pleasure that I can announce the imminent launch of Spark Plus Africa Fund, with approximately $50 million and a goal to reach a final capitalization of $70 million later this year. Investors in Spark Plus are a mix of private sector investors like family offices, foundations, and pension funds. These investors would not have come in were it not for catalytic commitments from the public sector, with the African Development Bank serving as the fund's anchor investor and 5 additional public development finance institutions from the US and Europe approving investments in this first-of-its-kind fund dedicated to clean cooking. I would like to thank all of those who've made Spark Plus a reality. We appreciate the generous support of NORAD, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Osprey Foundation, each of whom have supported Spark Plus during its development. We're also honored to have been supported by the International Climate Finance Accelerator and the Government of Luxembourg. Pioneering initiatives like Spark Plus would not be possible without the patient and risk-tolerant grants from committed donors. The sector needs your continued support to build a vibrant ecosystem for Spark Plus investees to scale and to grow a pipeline of clean cooking businesses. This is an exciting time for investors and innovators in the clean cooking space, and for the millions of people in Africa and billions around the world that stand to gain improved health and well-being by adopting the clean stoves and cooking fuels that we all take for granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much. And I'm delighted that we have Xavier Pierluca. You're managing partner at Enabling Capital, which will host the new Spark Plus fund that we just heard about. Could you tell us a little bit more about the fund and how it can potentially change the sector?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thanks for having me in this great panel today. Indeed, it has taken us some years to raise Spark Plus at a level of $50 to $70 million. We're very excited about it, right? I mean, Spark Plus is the result of the cooperation of a very focused not-for-profit, the Clean Cooking Alliance, and us, Enabling Capital, an experienced impact manager. We brought together our experiences and understanding of the sector and the characteristics of investing in emerging markets. This fund, right, has so many potential development impacts today, improving the health and livelihood of millions, increasing energy access, mitigating climate change, improving gender inequality, protecting the forest, etc. What Dimfna indicated is that the key things we've done with Spark Plus has been to align in a blended finance vehicle, development finance institutions, public institutions, in order to crowd in commercial investors like family offices and pension funds, in order to further the outreach and adoption of clean cooking products and fuels in sub-Saharan Africa. Generally, that's a sector that would have struggled to attract such private investment. We believe the fund comes really at the right time now to support the development of the sector, and we're very optimistic, right? I mean, the sector is now composed of real entrepreneurs with a vision for the sector, like Peter, like Anna, that have described their business models that are extremely innovative, making use of technology, which is providing quality products and generating affordability as well to low-income customers, such as Pego solutions, right? We're very optimistic also because the growth of the carbon market will also act as a formidable driver and subsidy to further the outreach of clean cooking products. We are aiming to target, as you know, the low and the lower middle income segments of the population in sub-Saharan Africa. In order to do so, we need to understand that we have to focus our attention on the development and support of companies that are delivering distributed energy solutions. These are the solutions which leapfrog traditional infrastructure that we are all used to, of course, just as mobile telecom has done for communications in Africa and I would say other developing markets. In the context of clean cooking, instead of building pipe natural gas infrastructure, we are investing in smart solutions like IoT-enabled LPG, biogas, electric, ethanol or biomass-based technologies. These are solutions which truly meet consumer needs and are adapted to the on-the-ground realities of the markets in which they are needed. Understanding the constraints and hurdles of delivering access to distributed energy solutions, Spark Plus will be taking a value chain approach, as Dimfna indicated previously, right? We are targeting all of the key actors of the clean cooking solutions value chains to ensure the sector development. To achieve our mission, we will engage with a mix of financial instruments from long-term equity to shorter-term senior secured debt and accelerate the growth of early-stage companies that are exhibiting real potential like burn and circle gas, right, for scale and sustainability. We can provide and we will provide capital for corporate growth, to finance inventory, receivables, working capital, and we'll be working with manufacturers, distributors, and financing providers as well, or others who are enabling the adoption of clean cooking technologies and fuels. We are very thankful for the support that has been provided to the sector and our initiative to date, including our first close investors, as well as public institutions like Norad, of course. We also want to participate as a field builder going forward. And our goal will be to act as a catalyst and ensure that many others, funders, will follow, will participate to bring the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of private capital that are needed to reach universal access.
Thank you, Xavier. So how important is it for burn and circle gas that a fund like Spark Plus has been established? And Peter, would you like to lead, please? Can I?
Here we go, Matthew. Absolutely. You know, it's a critical support for Burn to partner with Spark Plus. So we're hoping to be able to announce a partnership and investment with Spark Plus soon. But yeah, for a very long time, there hasn't been funds in the sector because, again, as we talked about before, people saw the sort of dysfunction in the sector. But I guess just to back up for 1 second, is the reason why Burn has been successful is because we're really providing a really strong economic value proposition. Right now, households spend $20 billion a year on charcoal. So just by providing a fuel-efficient stove, let's say 50%, you can save families $10 billion across the region. What's changing now is with carbon finance coming in, one stove in one household can generate anywhere from $100 to $500 in carbon revenue. So cook stoves are no longer just a great opportunity for improving households, reducing deforestation, reducing indoor air pollution, all of those things. But it's actually now a great financial investment because one stove can generate so much carbon revenue. So yeah, the timing of the Spark Plus fund is great. It's going to be very catalytic. It's going to allow Burn to scale, which will allow us to then produce more stoves and generate more carbon revenue. So yeah, the timing could be not more perfect.
That's a great point, Peter. Thank you. The economic value proposition is so important. Hanan, what about you? How important is Spark Plus for Circle Gas?
Thanks. Fundraising for a clean cooking company, however promising, is a big challenge because even for development finance institutions, it sort of falls between the cracks of various funding and investment buckets. Clean cooking is not normally considered in the experience set of the large infrastructure funds, even though in our case, the funding that we need is for infrastructure, because it's retail equipment in the home and not a power plant, for example, that the infrastructure funds would be used to. It's not considered attractive by the consumer funds, even though it's a consumer-facing product, because it's energy and the consumer base has very low income. And banks normally require much more scale and track record in order to be interested. Impact funds are interested in clean cooking, but they can only usually fund very small ticket investments and have lots of very onerous strings attached. They're also very conditioned by their experiences in investing in solar home systems companies, which have very different business models and customer base to clean cooking companies often. The great thing about talking to the Spark Plus fund, even though it's still very small, and I hope that it gets much larger, is that they understand and value the clean cooking proposition that Peter mentioned, and as did you, Elizabeth. The fact is that cooking with charcoal is more expensive than cooking with gas in our markets, and the market for dirty fuels is a multi-billion-dollar market. There is definitely money to be made in selling clean cooking fuel. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Vilde Grønn Larsen, you are Senior Client Executive at Export Finance Norway, and you've worked with small and medium-sized enterprises in Africa to help them secure funding. Having listened to Hanan and Peter describing their businesses and Xavier talking about the new Spark Plus fund, do you see a role in this sector for Eksfin?
As a starting point, I would say yes. And I'm also very excited that we, as an export credit agency, are invited into this discussion. But when I say yes, it also comes with a few buts, unfortunately. I think also that I need to broaden the scope a little bit, not talking about just cooking solutions, but also access to clean energy in general. Though we can go, we can keep it at a small scale. But, one issue for us is that, of course, we, or Eksfin, is an export credit agency. So the financing that we provide is, of course, tied to Norwegian exports. And our mandate is to support Norwegian exporters and not development. That said, of course, we also like to see that the transactions that we participate in has a positive impact, and we do score transactions based on their contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. But of course, given that it's tied to exports, we are a little bit tied in that sense. And of course, another issue for us is that our financing is on commercial terms, meaning that we have to be convinced that a borrower is able to repay a loan in accordance to agreed terms and with interest. And looking at startup companies, for example, entering into a new market, that's very often challenging. And if you are entering into a market with high risk catering consumers and perhaps small businesses, it's very challenging. So I do see that, in that startup phase, what we can offer is usually very limited. However, as soon as you have a proven business model, you have a positive cash flow, we are happy to discuss financing, scaling up the business. And we know that the market potential is huge, so that doesn't necessarily have to take that long. Of course, given that it's Norwegian content in the transaction. I think another issue is also that is relevant is the business model. We cannot provide financing to suppliers or distributors of consumer goods such as gas stoves. But if, for example, you are renting out or leasing out equipment, it can be gas cylinders, it could be perhaps also pay-as-you-go systems, but more so perhaps off-grid solar solutions to small businesses and institutions, etc. We can provide financing to suppliers based on rental and leasing contracts if they're tied for a few years. And of course, we see this as a change in how businesses operate, that you see more goods and technology being offered as a service rather than being sold as a good. And I also think the benefit, if you manage to combine this business model with financing in low-income countries, you also provide access to technology to consumers, businesses, and institutions that they would not be able to finance if they had to buy it, but they can use it on a rental or service basis, which is also what Hanan talked about earlier, giving access. So I think that's a positive thing that maybe we can contribute with, and we have been doing a few transactions under this model. I think another thing that is also sometimes challenging for us is the size of the transaction. We don't, on paper, we don't have a minimum size, but of course it's complicated to put together a cross-border financing transaction. And it can also involve transaction costs, which means that from a practical perspective, usually that, there should be a minimum size of the transaction. Of course, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what that size is, depending a little bit, on the type of transaction, the market you're entering into, the country, etc. But we are happy to look at small-scale transactions as well and see if that's doable. But of course, if you're moving on to more larger scale ways of supplying and providing access to clean energy, talking about perhaps a mini-grid catering for a whole community, including businesses, institutions, households, or it can also be perhaps off-grid solar solutions to businesses and perhaps also consumers, then I think export financing can be a very relevant instrument. And actually, I have one more point, which can be useful. I mean, because we are an export credit agency, and we don't just provide long-term financing. We can also provide guarantees, and that could be risk mitigating guarantees. And we can actually also provide risk, political risk insurance to investors, also investors investing in commercial businesses in, high risk in terms of political risk climates. So I hope also that could be a contributor to making investors more comfortable going into these markets.
Yes, absolutely. I think guarantees are a big part of the solution as well. So I think there's no doubt about the need to increase access to clean energy. We all agree on that. But how should agencies like NORAD and investors engage in the sector of clean cooking and small to medium-sized enterprises to really accelerate progress? And can I ask you just to limit your comments to 1 minute each, please, and starting with Xavier.
Okay, if I cannot unmute myself, it's going to be shorter. Thanks. The quantum of funding necessary, right, to achieve universal access is significant. So we are already greatly appreciative of the financial and strategic support that NORAD is already contributing to the sector so far. What we believe, right, is that NORAD could play a further role by engaging in the provision of technical assistance to SMEs operating in the clean cooking sector and doing it alongside investors such as Spark Plus. We have found in the past that technical assistance can be more effective if it can be deployed in close coordination with a debt or equity investment, basically. TA coupled with long-term investment allows to tackle key strategic issues as well as operational improvements with long-term projects, versus TA that is implemented on a standalone basis, which often result in engaging in much needed but shorter term projects only, right? Yeah. Another aspect, where Norad can play an important role is in making the pipeline of companies more investable by supporting them with smart subsidies via result-based finance. Like the State of Modern Energy Cooking Services report from 2019 from the World Bank shows, in addition to quite a lot of private sector investment, if universal access is to be achieved, we will need an even greater amount of public support, right? Like smart subsidies. This is particularly true if the private sector is to reach beyond the urban consumer into less commercially viable markets, right, including those who are extremely poor in rural areas.
Thank you, Xavier. Vilde?
Yes. Well, as I was mentioning or talking about before, I think the startup phase is very difficult for many companies. And I think in order to serve the demand, I think we need a lot of more newcomers coming into this market on the supplier side. And I have a lot of businesses coming to me with great solutions, but they spend years and years trying to, scatter together financing. So I think perhaps if, and the Spark Plus fund was very interesting to hear about. But I think, getting, green funds or grants or development grants to provide support in that initial phase could be very, very relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And Peter?
Yeah, I think Norad can support through funding grants and R&D. So we just completed a Norad grant that helped us launch into West Africa. And so those operations will soon be profitable. So that type of grant for new markets, R&D, pilots are super critical. I think to bring cooking to the real bottom of the pyramid in rural areas where people are on less than $2 a day, they're never going to be able to afford a $40 product. So it's going to require subsidies, RBFs, to be able to get that price for a wood stove for the 600 million people that were going to continue to rely on wood down to a reasonable price. And we've shown that lowering that price really allows the uptake of super fuel efficient wood stoves to increase. Yeah. The other is for electric appliances. It requires a big asset financing play. So if we want to roll out electric appliances to 2 million households, we'll require about $100 million of asset financing. So, but the great thing about it, as I said, is that can all be backstopped with carbon. So that $100 million investment will actually generate more than $1 billion return.
Right. Thank you. And last but not least, Hanan, any advice from you?
Thanks. I think Norad should continue to do what it's already been doing, which is raising the profile of clean cooking as an urgent issue, and also the role of LPG in achieving wider access to clean cooking, which also Norad is really a leader in doing very evidence-based work in understanding the role and the importance of expanding access to LPG. More broadly, for grant-making bodies, digital products like the ones Circle Gas uses with our smart meter have really rich household-by-household usage data and are really well suited to delivering subsidies to customers to help make something out of reach more affordable. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, we have a little bit of time left, not much, but just one final question. This conference is about game-changing solutions. So can you just finally limit to 1 minute each? Any game-changing solutions you see in this sector? And starting with Vilde.
Well, I'm glad to say that there is innovation happening on the financing side as well. And as I mentioned before, we have been able to provide financing to suppliers of services, and we provide financing upfront based on a service contract entered into for a few years. And I think this is quite groundbreaking, and I haven't seen any other institutions doing it yet. So I think that's great. And that said, there are already quite a few initiatives and more focus on finding solutions to finance small-scale off-grid renewable energy systems. So I think, perhaps we will see more transactions like that. And I just saw one recently that was financing a company in Kenya, I think, small business providing solar systems to homes that were able to actually get financing from a development bank for that investment.
Great. Thank you. And what about you, Peter?
Yeah, I think that the big opportunity is going to be in electric, urban, on-grid. So in the pilots that we've run, that the savings that people get from using electric is roughly about $3 per week, and the cost of ownership is about $2 per week. So we could actually roll out electric cooking across all urban environments using pay-as-you-go and electric appliances, and in 10 years' time, displace all charcoal consumption in urban sub-Saharan Africa. So that's the exciting opportunity we see.
Wow, great. Hanan?
Thanks. At Circle Gas, we have our proprietary software and hardware suites, and we are just continuing to invest in R&D and the potential that can come from cheaper access to telephones and continued features in both phones and our smart meters. So we're excited about that. So watch this space. Thanks.
We will most definitely watch this space. And Xavier?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think many elements I'm gonna embark on have been mentioned already, right? But I think it all comes from one key concept, no? That in clean cooking and access to energy, generally speaking, we need to offer clients aspirational products, right? Products that they can desire to own and use, no? And we need to sell these products in ways which are affordable and align with our household cash flow patterns, generally speaking. So just like Unilever discovered, right, several decades ago with the introduction of sachets, of fast-moving consumer goods in developing markets, which require small regular payments without the need for large upfront purchases, the same can be achieved, right, in access to energy. So the off-grid solar sector has already demonstrated that pay-as-you-go business models can generate affordability mechanisms that are necessary to broaden right access to lighting products. And examples such as Circle Gas are showing that the same is true for clean cooking, right? So LPG with smart meters is also particularly suited, but this approach can also be implemented, as Peter indicated, right, for biogas, but electric cooking solutions, no? Biomass cookstoves companies are also integrating pay-as-you-go technology into stoves. And with Spark Plus, basically on our end, right, we're going to focus at opportunities throughout the sector that relies on fuels and fuel sales tech-enabled appliances as well. We believe, nevertheless, right, that efficient stoves will keep playing an important role, especially with the state of the carbon market, as Peter indicated. But lastly as well, I just want to mention that, we're speaking about technology, right? But we also need to drive partnerships in Africa that are less technology driven, but with intermediaries such as microfinance institutions or distributors, no? These can be winning strategies as well to further the outreach of products. And at the end, right, we need to solve for the last mile question, right, of distribution in Africa and the financing hurdles in all of these markets.
Great, thank you so much. Our time is up, but thank you to our great panelists. And clearly a lot more needs to be done, but there are certainly opportunities starting to emerge.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful panel. Like I said when I was introducing you, it's been really interesting. You've pointed to the technology, but also the funding opportunities. So we're really happy to have had you. We're now headed for a good long break. And when you come back, we'll discuss the power of facts. So please be back at 1 o'clock Central European Time. Hi, everybody. In this last session of the 2022 NORAD conference, we will take on the world's largest and most ambitious agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. Once again, NORAD's Director General will be back with an introduction, let me put it this way, from the dungeons of Omicron. His message today is that no matter the challenge, solutions must be knowledge-based. Facts, truth, both at the heart of NORAD's strategy. And looking back in history, it is this mindset that has led to many human advancements.
On the corner of Broadwick Street and Poland Street in Soho, London, there's a small landmark. A water pump without a handle. A strange landmark, I think, but it tells a story. Right down the street from the pump, there's a pub called Jon Snow. And I must add, this is not the Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. It's nothing to do with Game of Thrones. This guy is an actual real-life hero, just wait. But what is the connection between this pub and the water pump? Well, in 1849, there was a cholera outbreak in the neighborhood. It was dramatic. Each outbreak took many lives. It was a common cause of death. A doctor, the real Jon Snow, was convinced that the sickness spread because of contaminated drinking water. He was laughed at, and his theories was met with forceful resistance. Because as everyone knew, it was the foul smell in the air that caused cholera, not water. But Snow was a persistent man. 5 years later, in 1854, there was a new outbreak of cholera in London. Jon Snow started working. He interviewed a lot of those infected and found that they were all connected to a specific water pump. Hesitantly, the local government finally removed the handle of the pump so it could no longer be used. The outbreak stopped. Jon Snow was right. The disease spread through water, not smell. And this small pump, or rather the removal of it, changed the way infectious diseases were managed. It became a game changer. The next part of the Norad conference is about how we use knowledge to inform development efforts. There's a phrase that some Norwegian viewers will have heard me use a number of times. Fakta har makta, and it also rhymes in Norwegian. It means, like Norad formulated in our strategy, that facts inform policy. Our rationale is this. Development aid is a very limited resource. Total global ODA is less than the Norwegian annual national budget. But these limited resources do the most important job in the world, to abolish poverty, cut emissions, and reduce inequality. And we spend the money in some of the world's most complex contexts. So quite simply, we do not have the luxury not to work fact-informed. I'm a great fan of the work of Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. They've been pivotal in using evidence and scientific methods to measure results in development economics. For instance, they and others showed through systematic research and randomized control tests that direct transfers of capital can break the vicious cycle of poverty. Because often, poor people are poor simply because they were born poor. To study the effects of our grants in a more systematic way, Norad is these days looking into a more formalized cooperation with JPAL. JPAL is a research center specialized in studying impacts of social programs, and is directed by Esther Duflo, who you also will be hearing more from today. We will also be hearing from Ola Rosling, co-author of Factfulness, on the importance of getting the facts right and why we also too seldom do. So we need the facts, but the facts are not enough. We also need to let facts inform policy. For that, we need, amongst others, a vibrant public debate. And we don't have enough of that, rather the opposite. Norwegian development aid is approximately $5 billion. And I can't think of any $5 billion spent by the Norwegian government that are less debated in this country. But that's actually why we're here also today. This conference with 1,700 registered attendees is one of many efforts by Norad to create platforms for discussion and platforms to let facts inform policy.
Yes, indeed. Let facts inform policy and let policy inform action. Esther Duflo is our next guest, and she's from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, co-founder and co-director of JPAL, the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, and herself, professor of poverty alleviation and development economics. Her topic today is effective and equitable climate action under the title Good Economics for Warmer Times. Welcome to the conference, Professor.
Welcome. Today I'm going to talk about a good economics for warmer times, evidence for effective and equitable climate action. My name is Esther Duflo, and I'm the professor of economics and one of the founder and directors of the Jameel Poverty Action Lab at MIT. In the summer of 2020, we could have thought that there would be a new urgency on climate change as the sky of San Francisco was becoming bright orange, as people understood the scope of potential catastrophes in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. There was a silver lining that perhaps this would awaken a conscience that doing something for climate change was urgent. And yet, by the time of the Glasgow conference, it was pretty clear that this urgency seemed to have largely disappeared. So why is that? Well, the problem is that the discussion of climate change is a very difficult discussion for three reasons. The first one is that most of the responsibility of climate change comes from developed countries. The second problem is that they are not the ones who are going to suffer for climate change the most. And the third is that when faced with a crisis, they will act on their citizens first. And that all makes it very difficult for them to come together to deal with this problem, which is never considered to be urgent enough to really systematically change policy and activities at the international levels. So let me elaborate on these 3 points a little bit. The first one is that the emissions responsible for climate change are mainly due to the behavior of rich country citizens. We of course know that historically that it is because of the way that today's rich countries have become rich that there is a stock of CO2 in the atmosphere that is threatening the planet today. But even today, people are saying, well, you know, China is responsible for a lot of the emissions. India is responsible for the emissions. That's correct. But China and India are warehouses for the world. And the reason why they emit so much is because they produce a lot. And if instead of looking at emission from the places where things are produced, and we are looking at emissions that are used to create the goods that people are consuming, we have something called the 10-50 rules, which is 10% of the highest polluters are responsible for about 50% of global emissions, and the 50% lower emitters are responsible for 10% of global emission. The second problem is that the cost of climate change will be felt in the poorer part of the world. Why is that? Well, because poor countries tend to be in warmer places, and therefore, as the planet warms, all of the climate models are predicting that the increase in very hot days, that is days above 32 centigrades, will be mainly in the poorer countries, as you can see from this map in South America and in Africa. And even more so by 2050, where you see, for example, the Sahel regions becoming incredibly hot. The second issue is that because there is less possibility to adapt in poor countries, a given hot day is more likely to lead to death in India than it is in the US, for example. So the increase in the number of deaths is several-fold in India when the day is about 32 degrees. And we see much smaller changes in the US, mainly due to the widespread availability of air conditioning. All these two things combined means that the mortality cost in the next 20 years will be mainly experienced in countries that are poor today. In fact, there will be mortality gain in Sweden, Norway, for example. And even more so by 2050, where you're seeing the Baltic countries benefiting by avoiding very cold spell, and the north of Africa and the Sahel really suffering. Now, all that would be bad enough, but not as bad if it was possible to mount an effective response, perhaps due to a sense of collective responsibility for our shared planet. But what we've seen is during the COVID-19 crisis is that rich countries always put their citizens first when confronted with a crisis, even in irrational ways. So let's look at the COVID-19 crisis. The reaction from the Western world was really underwhelming. On the one hand, as you can see on the left graph, they spent trillions on their own economies, but didn't mobilize the funds that would have been needed to spend money on the poorer countries. As a result, the fiscal response designed to help people to cope with the crisis was much more effective and present in the rich countries than in the poor countries. Second, of course, as everybody here knows by now, the world was really incapable of getting poorer countries, in particular in Africa, vaccinated against COVID-19 crisis. Even as of today, you can see that the African continent has much less of the vaccine supplies or secured vaccine than the rest of the world. And when I'm saying this is irrational, this of course is irrational because the more unvaccinated people are in the world, the more there are opportunities for the vaccine to change and therefore to come back and infect the rich countries. So if the rich countries are not able to come together to help our planet when it is in their immediate self-interest, then there is a big risk that there won't be when there won't be this immediate self-interest, like in the case of the climate, unfortunately. So we really need to consciously break the malediction of inaction, and we need to do it now, before it is too late. What does this mean? Number one, the world must meet climate finance commitment to the low and middle income countries. Such commitments do exist. Funds are needed for adaptation and mitigation. Yet the promises made at the COP in Copenhagen of $100 billion annually were certainly not met and not really formally renewed in Glasgow so far. Second is, in order to fight climate change, we need to develop ingenuity. Of course, there is technological ingenuity that is going to be essential, and there is a large reliance on technological solutions in climate discussions. However, technology alone is not going to be sufficient. Often, the purely technological solutions is disappointing in real life, as shown in randomized controlled trials of home weatherizations in the US or energy consulting in India that were conducted by JPL affiliates. On the other hand, the good news is that behavior and policy change are important and they are also possible. For example, in Gujarat, we found with other researchers that better regulatory enforcement reduced industrial pollution. And work showed that payment for ecosystem services reduced deforestation in Uganda, which is a possibility and a template for future works along this line. The third point is very much like we cannot rely on technology alone, we cannot rely on ESG funds alone. At the Glasgow conference, much hope was put on climate finance. Climate finance is great, but there is absolutely no guarantee that climate finance investment will lead to real reduction in emissions. Ultimately, the monitoring of the impact these funds used for carbon offsets, which are often financed by ESG funds, is poor. And in particular, it often goes to solutions that are technological solutions whose impact in real life has not been proven. And as we just saw, when these solutions are deployed in real life and evaluated, the results are often disappointing. So in order to maximize the impact of these ESG funds, we need to know much more about what works and what doesn't work to reduce emission or to offset them in some way or the other. And we also need to rely on policy as well. The last point is we can't tackle climate change without tackling inequality within and across countries. And the reason is that if people, in particular poor people in rich countries, perceive climate change to be a concern of the rich people, which is to be paid for by taxes imposed on the on the poor people, then they are not going to want to vote for this, and they are not going to support these efforts, with two consequences. One is that the efforts are going to stall, and the second is that it could lead to the rise of populism and a backlash against both social and environmental efforts. And this is an example of a slogan that was deployed against carbon taxation in France. And the problem was that carbon taxation came on the heel of a decrease in wealth tax, or in fact an elimination of wealth tax. So this was seen as something which was anti-poor. The upshot of all of this is that there are many things we don't yet know. There are many things we don't yet know about how to change behavior, how to do this in a way that is equitable both around the world and within countries. And therefore, development organizations such as NORAD can and should generate and use evidence to reduce poverty and emission more effectively. How can they do that? First of all, invest in randomized evaluations as a tool for innovation and learning. There are many candidate solutions. You can try them out, create a library that both private and public actors can rely on to inform their decision-making and their choice in what to invest. Leverage data for climate action, reduce barrier to access, and incorporate insights into decision-making. And launch evidence to policy units, evidence labs, such as, for example, the Fund for Innovation and Development at the Agence Française Développement, which both is investing in climate and development solution with an effort to evaluate them and scale up what works. And finally, not over and above these innovation funds, mainstream evaluation in the project cycle through earmarking for funding, personnel, and partnership for evaluations at the design scale. It is only by learning more and generating evidence at an accelerated path that we will be able to generate the type of positive dynamics that can break the malediction of inaction. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Professor Duflo of MIT. Now, we're honored to announce the attendance of Bill Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In his talk on leadership in global health and development, Mr. Gates will be looking at the critical year ahead.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you. Thank you to NORAD for extending the invitation. And thanks to all my fellow speakers for drawing attention to the Sustainable Development Goals, which are now due in only 8 years. I particularly want to commend the government of Norway for its impressive global leadership, both before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. From your generous foreign assistance every year to your support for a wide range of critical health and development issues, Norway is a model for the world to aspire to. Your backing of some of the most effective institutions in global health has been essential to the progress we've made over the past 20 years. Norway is an original Gavi donor. It's also one of the founders of CEPI, as well as its host, and our foundation has been honored to work alongside you to accelerate vaccine R&D around the world, especially during the pandemic. Norway has also been a key donor to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and the most generous supporter of the fund on a per capita basis. Your additional contributions to the COVID-19 response mechanism have been critical to ensuring we don't lose ground on existing epidemics while fighting this pandemic. We hope you will continue your strong record of support during the fund's replenishment this year. With only 8 years until the SDGs are due, we need 2022 to be a year of action. It's going to take everyone, governments, philanthropies, nonprofits, and the private sector, committed, focused, and working together to meet our collective goals by 2030. That's especially true given that COVID-19 has set back progress on many fronts. The pandemic reminds us how essential health is to all of the Sustainable Development Goals, including eliminating poverty. We've seen how waves of infections have forced lockdowns, damaged economies, and plunged millions back into poverty. These effects have been experienced disproportionately by vulnerable populations, and we've widened the gaps in gender inequality. The inequity has been compounded by the fact that despite having great vaccines, far too few of the people at high risk in low-income countries have gotten their first shot. Our unequal distribution and funding for infrastructures reinforced that difference. To reach the SDGs by 2030, including ending poverty, the world must be much better prepared for the next pandemic. We can't afford to get caught flat-footed again or to have another inequitable response. This means building a system for accelerating the global supply of vaccines, one that can make more doses and allocate them more equitably. We also need better tools to contain the outbreaks when they come along. We need more readily available rapid testing, more genetic sequencing, see variants, and more disease surveillance that will catch the pandemic in the early stage. The good news is that by investing in these public health tools now, we can minimize the likelihood of another COVID-19. And these investments will bring benefits during non-pandemic years. These systems during peacetime can track and fight the other infectious diseases that remain a huge burden in low-income countries. Of course, even as we work to end this pandemic and prepare for the next, we need to focus on another crisis, climate change. This year and every year going forward will be critical to that fight. As I said in my recent climate book, we need to invest now in game-changing innovations that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and give everyone access to clean, affordable, and reliable energy. We also need to support adaptation, helping people deal with the negative effects of climate change that are already here. By giving them better seeds and other tools, we can minimize those impacts. Reaching zero emissions by 2050 will be one of the toughest tasks humans have ever accomplished. But I remain optimistic we can get it done. At COP26 in Glasgow, I saw a great deal of enthusiasm and intense engagement behind green innovation. And I think the world is waking up to the fact that we need bold, collaborative action right now to reach those goals. Here again, Norway has been a strong leader. Your pledge to double climate financing and triple support for adaptation efforts by 2026 will hopefully inspire other nations to step up. The more boldly we act now, the more likely we are to succeed in the long run. If we work together and build the innovations and systems we need for the future, I believe we can both avoid future pandemics, curb climate change, and also achieve the SDGs to create a better, fairer, and healthier world. It won't be easy, but nothing worth accomplishing ever is. And I'm very glad that all of you here are part of this collective effort. Thank you.
Big thank you to Bill Gates for attending this year's NORAD conference, and not least for his call of action that goes out to all of us. Now, our next speaker is an avid defender of fact-based information. In 2014, he coined the term factfulness and later co-wrote the Factfulness book, which was launched in 2018. Ola Rosling is president and co-founder of Gapminder Foundation, which he founded together with his wife Anna and his father Hans. Now, Gapminder believes in making education about the SDGs as sustainable development goals, less ideological and more fact-based. Thank you for joining us, Ola Rosling.
Thank you very much. So that was a great introduction. Yes, the anti-ideological profile is really what I want to emphasize here. And I can show that the knowledge that we're conveying and the facts we're working with are pretty neutral. I do that by testing people's knowledge. And I sent out a test to many of the participants. And today, now here, I'm going to show the results of how people answered. Those were 9 ABC questions, and this was the first one. We're going to look at your results and compare it with the data. Let's start with this one. 30 years ago, 56% of the world's population lived in so-called low-income countries. What is the share today? Is it A, B, or C? 9%, 35%, or 60%? Let's look at this starting in a very, very long perspective. Let's go back to year 1800 and look at 2 indicators, because I also asked a question about life expectancy. This is the World Health Chart, one of our free teaching materials that is used across the world in classrooms to show a fact-based worldview. It's like a world map. You can see all the countries back in 1800, far before development really took off. Back then, most countries had a life expectancy below 40 and very low incomes. Norway is quite high there. It's the small bubble at the very top, actually. And you will see it soon bumping up. No, it's on top of Germany there in 1800. But the important thing with this world map is that it changes. Let's play the first 100 years in just 10 seconds. Sorry, like this. There we go. So during 1800 until 1900, the world changed. You can see Norway and Sweden and Iceland leading the world there to the right, and Denmark having longer lives than anyone else. That was the Spanish flu. And here we are now in a world in 1960. After the World War, the world looked like this. And this is one of the fact questions I asked you about life expectancy. Back then, 55% of humanity lived in countries where life expectancy was below 50. What is the share today? That was one of the questions. And let's play forward now and see how the world continued changing during the next 30 years or so until year 1990. Okay? You can see already by 1990, slightly before the HIV pandemic, most countries had reached above 50 in life expectancy already back then. And here's the second question I asked: how many countries today are in low income definition by the World Bank? It was. I didn't mention that in the question, but I'll get back to that. In 1990, that's not so long time ago, right? 58% of humanity, the vast majority, lived in a country classified as low income. How many are there today in such countries? Okay, we play forward and you can see how majority of the countries who used to be low income have now reached a middle income level. And if the world continues with this GDP per capita growth, roughly after the pandemic, we're going to have a world where almost no country are on the level where low income was defined. And this change, which I just showed you, where there are no countries left below life expectancy 50, and there are hardly any countries left, 9% of humanity, in so-called low-income countries, compared to what people answered. Okay, so here are the results when I asked this question. Correct answer now we know is 9%, of course. And actually, together with Ipsos 2 years ago, we asked this in 32 countries. And here are the results. On average, 7.2% of people picked the right answer. in Saudi Arabia more than elsewhere. But of course, the uncertainty of these kind of polls are not perfect. Consistently, though, across all the countries we tested, people, when they hear low-income countries, they assume it's a lot of people. Very few pick this option. On an ABC question like this, it's actually quite easy to pick the right answer compared to the result. If you ask a monkey an ABC question, they have a 33% chance of picking the right answer. Monkeys would score better than humans in all the countries where we have tested. Okay, so wait. This means that humans are not just randomly guessing, right? They are not just picking A, B, or C like the monkeys do, because if you do that, you're going to score 33%. To score less than random requires misconceptions. And these are the kind of systematic misconceptions that we measure. When we say low-income countries, people think of something like developing countries, which is completely not defined. And then they assume a majority of mankind live in these kind of countries. In their minds, people don't have multiple categories. They think about poor countries and rich countries. When someone says poor countries, do they mean Poland, Brazil, Tunisia, Philippines, or Malawi? In Malawi, there are still lots of kids who don't go to school, where in Poland, every child goes to school. It's an enormous difference of what we mean when we say poor and poverty. And that's why I asked about low-income countries. Let's just look at the results. Here are your results. 360 people of you answered. Of course, the most knowledgeable and busy, they didn't have time to answer. But those who answered scored, unfortunately, worse than Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. 14% managed to pick the right answer. Congratulations, you're pretty knowledgeable. Actually, you shouldn't compare yourself with monkeys. I know you don't like that. You actually like to rather compare yourself with Swedes. Like me, I'm from Sweden. 7% of the Swedes picked the right answer. So in this sense, Norway, at least this audience here today, is twice as knowledgeable about the low-income miracle that has happened because these people moved to middle-income countries, and 14% of you picked that right answer. Here are the number of people who picked the wrong answer in all the countries in your audience. Look at your results, 59% of you. Imagine that the number of people in so-called low-income countries increased. You know that the population in the world increased. And when someone says low income, you think that's all the other countries, pretty much the non-Western countries or something, and you know population increased that. And you completely miss that 75% of humanity live in middle income countries, ranging to down in Bangladesh, for example, all the way up to Brazil. And then a country like Chile is actually a high-income country. But most people don't get that. We fail to realize when the world is changing. And when the world goes through what Norway, it took 100 years for Norway to go through that change, and the world does it in 40 years, we completely miss it. We don't realize why industries are now escaping Europe and flourishing in the rest of the world. So that was one question. I asked you 9 questions, okay? This was the one at the very bottom. And I'm going to focus, of course, on those where you scored bad. There were 4 of them where you scored better than chimpanzees. So I'm going to skip them completely, even though, of course, it's not really a good thing that almost half of you believe that many countries have short lives and you think extreme poverty in rich countries is quite high, etc. But let's forget about that and instead focus on the things you don't know, because that's what our foundation do. We don't really work with education. We try to get rid of misconceptions. So where you score worse than random, there is a job for us to do, right? The many yearbooks that come out and the climate reports, most of us, we hear about them. Maybe we print them out and put them under our arm like this and pretend that we read the book. But most of us don't really consume facts, even though we live in the first time ever when there are lots of facts about pretty much everything. So this is the question. How are we going to make sure that we actually know the facts about the present when we try to forecast the future? Because those people in the middle-income countries moving up the income scale, they are going to consume more than any country or any population has ever done before. The real world market is coming next. What we've seen so far is only the trailer, okay? So, but what did you answer wrongly? Well, you had the low income misconception that it increased. And then also there is another question there where I asked, where are people least satisfied with their lives on average? And a majority of you, just like the public when we ask, they think that in high-income countries, people are least satisfied. There's a complete misconception. And I know people don't like to think that more money makes you more happy. And of course, there's not such automatic correlation. But if you look at the data, when you ask in pretty much every happiness study that has covered all the way from low income to high income, you see a very, very strong pattern. I want to show this over time because it's such a highly sensitive topic. In our culture, in Sweden and Norway, we don't want money to make you happy. We want to refuse any statement that claim that money makes you happy. But when we do that, we fail to realize why 6 or 7 billion people on Earth are struggling to get as rich as we are. Look at Norway to the very far right. You're not the happiest in the world, that's Denmark. But you see this strong correlation. At the same time, there is a huge difference on the same income scale, as you can see. This was in 2006, and since then the UN has been collecting with Gallup quite good data. It's not perfect at all. Look at the pattern. When countries get richer, I'm going to play this forward up till a few years ago, and you can see now that as the countries get richer, actually many of them fall down. So there is not a clear automatic correlation. Look now, when they move forward, many of them are moving up and down, and India is definitely moving down as on average it is getting richer. Many people in India are not experiencing a richer life. They didn't share this income with everybody in the population. So of course, I'm not claiming that there is a simple correlation between money and happiness. But there's a good reason for people trying to get richer. Within these countries, the people with higher incomes are often happier. And in general, people strive to get more money, which means there will be more overconsumption, whether you like it or not. And that brings us over to the next topic about climate change. Let me show you this now instead of aggregated country averages. Here is a way to look at the data of number of people on different income level, dollars per day. I play it from 1800 just to get the big picture. Back then, most countries in the world were low-income countries if the definition had existed. Norway, Sweden were low-income countries. All the time up to the First World War, Second World War, a majority was low-income countries. Then middle-income countries, orange and green here, start to evolve. And not until the 70s, there were a portion of countries, this is when I was born, 75, there were two humps in the world. There were the rich and the poor, right? And instead of country average, we must see that within every country there is a huge difference. You can see in 2006 that the two humps have disappeared roughly, right? You can see the big hump in the middle now moving out of extreme poverty. And in 2022, we don't have a divided world. We don't have the poor and the rich. The 7 billion people are there in the middle. In extreme poverty, people are still lacking antibiotics and vaccines because they live in the poor tail in middle-income countries or in the low-income countries in the lower majority of the population. Here to the left, you see. But while we're looking at the left, you can see this part of the screen here where people have a very low income. That is the concern of bringing people out of extreme poverty, where fertility rates are huge, populations are still increasing. That's one side of the world. There they need economic growth. Up on the other end of the world, level 4, we call it here, high-income countries, we can see, I'm going to play this forward with a rough forecast I made with IMF GDP per capita growth to try to predict how many people are going to come up to this level of high income where we are, which means more CO2 emissions during the next couple of years. Just play it quickly forward. And you can see that now, during the next couple of years, if I'll try to change the color here to regions instead. You can see that in this part of the world, my computer is locked. Let's skip that, and you can do that on the website. Basically, the amount of high-end, high-income consumers is going to increase in all these middle-income countries. And that's really what puts a pressure on the climate and the common resources that we share on the planet. And our ability, if we can integrate Europe into that big hump of middle-income countries so that we can collaborate and participate in that global development of the rich who are getting richer, right? I'm afraid that Europeans in general fail to realize the enormous increase of incomes and capacities and education of that big hump of 5 billion. We continue living in the past where we were ahead of the pack, as you saw in the first graph, but we are no longer. And very soon, we don't have a chance to mandate exactly the rules for everything. We need to start educating our kids about a more humble kind of European. Yeah, you've met Swedes, you know, jag är inte sjuk, jag är bara svensk. There is a superiority that used to be before, but now Norway is richer than us. But most people in Sweden still kind of think of Norway as the little brother. We need to redefine our perception of each other when the reality changes. And that is a challenge on a global level. So now I want to end with 2 questions about climate change, climate action. This first one is crucial. During the past 40 years, the amount of oil and natural gas in known reserves, what happened? Did it double? Did it stay the same, or did it drop to half? Most people believe, as you can see in this survey, we did a small survey in the UK and in Sweden, and almost everyone, of course, intuitively say, as we have consumed more oil and gas, there must be less of it left in the ground, right? It sounds intuitive, but our exploration of new reserves have increased more than the consumption. And this is the data from British Petroleum official data. Fossil fuel reserves, at the top we have oil, 2.5 times the amount we had in 1980, known reserves. Of course, a different quality of oil, etc. But the gas as well, 2.8 times what we knew in 1980. When people don't know this, they don't realize the challenge of climate action. The fact that they believe the reserves are declining, so they're probably waiting for an automatic price increase. When we run out of a resource, the price goes up and we will naturally switch to something else. That will not happen. The challenge really is, and I tested climate activists on this one, and pretty much everyone are wrong about it. The challenge is we need to stop using the fossil fuels before we run out of it. That's a completely different challenge. Okay, here is the last question. And this one, I'd say pretty much everyone is wrong about. What happens to the CO2 level in the atmosphere if we have the annual emissions today? Okay, there's CO2 up there and we have our annual emissions. What happens? It increases up there, or it stays roughly the same, or it decreases. Most people intuitively say, if we have the emissions, it must decrease. It's wrong. If we have the emissions, it keeps increasing. How can that be? It's pretty simple, and it's very crucial. I say this is the most severe misunderstanding about climate action I know about. Please help spread this. Our material is free. I want to explain this to everybody. Every school kid should learn this in school instead of sitting and crying and just being aware. They need to understand how the climate works. Here is an example. If this is the emissions we have, humanity as total, in 2021 and next year we emit the same amount, and then next year the same amount again, right? Okay, everybody understands it keeps accumulating. Now I'm going to halve our emission. In 2025, imagine we manage to halve it. It keeps adding. You see, year by year, the cloud I'm sending up there is half as big as the previous year than it is now. But it just keeps adding, you see, at a slightly slower rate, but it adds up there. It's like a bathtub. If you keep pouring in water, it will increase, even though you pour in a little bit less. It's not until we reach zero that it stops increasing in the atmosphere. And most of you answered this question wrongly. How could you not know this? Haven't you talked about the climate pretty much every week during the last 5 years? In Södermalm in Stockholm, where I live, everybody talks about the climate, but they don't sit down and learn stuff. So what we're doing now, we're creating a free teaching material about climate facts. And when 95% of people are wrong about something, it means both the right politics and the left politics are equally wrong. So it's neutral. And these are the kind of facts we're finding, like the low-income question. It's where everyone are systematically wrong in the same direction. It means we can have a third position and common ground and realize we're wrong about stuff. And this has implications, because the moment we reach zero net emission, look now what happens during the next 100 years, How much of that CO2 in the atmosphere will remain 100 years later? That was the last question I asked you. We move forward. This is a rough model only, right? The amount of carbon dioxide that naturally disappears from the atmosphere is extremely low. You can hardly see it. Okay, 100 years from now, roughly 95% of whatever we put up there is still going to be up there 100 years from now. We'll leave it not just for the next generation and their grandchildren, but it's going to stay for a very, very long time, because even if the trees capture carbon, as we learn in the photosynthesis, it's a very slow process, and then the trees actually let the carbon back again when they fall into the earth, etc. It's a very small loop, and not much is captured. It's really when it turns into fossil, that's when the carbon disappears. The 5% that will disappear over 100 years goes into the oceans, most of it. These facts we need to understand. Otherwise, climate action becomes an ideological, emotional debate. We need real infrastructure changes to have a real energy transformation. And that needs to happen at the right end of the income scale, while the people at the poorest end, those in extreme poverty, are able to have economic growth with whatever means it takes. I'm ready to say, yes, they have to burn fossil fuels to get out of extreme poverty, because extreme poverty is hell. Okay? And the reason we want to stop climate change is to avoid human suffering in the future, 100 years from now. But there is human suffering already going on. We need to keep two thoughts in our head at the same time. We need to help people escape extreme poverty by building whatever infrastructure and resources they need to escape, right? That is one thing. That's at the low income end. At the high income end, we need to change our lifestyle, because we are the people who emit the emissions. We shouldn't confuse our emission with the people in extreme poverty. And this, I think, is a major challenge when it comes to the aid community in the future. To keep your head apart and say, okay, what applies to Swedish lifestyles must not apply everywhere else. You need to look at the data and compare the proportions. And this I don't see in how we're debating the global climate and the kind of pressure we try to push on everyone else, even though the high-income consumers are the emitters and the people who really exploit natural resources. So I'm trying to compile all these facts and make it possible for organizations, governmental agencies, and now I hope really by participating here today, I would like to see Norway to be the first fact-based country in the world. Because I've been trying to push Sweden for a long time, SIDA and UD, etc., to be the first ones. Some people there are really positive, but really to sit down and learn a lot of facts. It takes a lot of time. You know, when you got the driving license, you had to learn all the theory and all the rules for the traffic, and no one does it for free. I think organizations today in a changing world need to require learning from their employees to make sure that we can rely on collective wisdom when we try to forecast the future. Today, we're very far from that, and that's what we're trying to show with Gapminder. The misconceptions out there in the public also exist in this eminent audience who is watching this presentation here today. So please be humble and curious about the world. You're pretty wrong about a lot of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ola, for your myth-busting. It was very energetic, informative, and fun. So, we've talked about the pandemic several times during the conference because it has demonstrated a setback for many development efforts. Based on that, the last panel today will be discussing the pandemic as a driver of inequality. Now, we have the following participants in the panel. Director General of Norad, Bård Vegar Solhjell, might be down with Omicron, but he will surely be alive and kicking in the panel. Joining him will be Dr. Ayoade Alakija, co-chair of the Africa Vaccine Delivery Alliance. She has served as Chief Humanitarian Coordinator of Nigeria and is newly appointed Special Envoy to the World Health Organization ACT Accelerator. In the panel, we also have Administrator of UNDP, Achim Steiner. He has for decades been a global leader on sustainable development, climate resilience, and international cooperation. not least as former leader of the UN Environment Programme. And we have to welcome back Senior Advisor Nikolai Hegertun, who was here previously moderating a panel. He's also back. Enjoy the talk.
Thank you, Asta. The title of this last section is The Pandemic as a Driver of Inequality. And as mentioned, the pandemic has really exposed disparities between the haves and have-nots in this world. And this inequality, both within countries, but also between countries, is now plain to see for anyone. But the questions that we like to address now is what can development assistance or development cooperation do about this? And I want to start with you, Dr. Alakija. Historically, we've conceptualized inequality by looking at income distributions. But at the moment, it seems that inequality is just as relevant for us to understand the ongoing efforts to deal with the pandemic, for example, or even the climate crisis. We've heard today that 10% of global emitters, that's just 770 million people, are responsible for 48% of global CO2 emissions. And the bottom half, that's 3.8 billion people, are responsible for around 12% of global emissions. So how should the development community relate to and apply these new insights and this broader understanding of inequality?
Well, thank you very much, and it is very good to join you all. I'm very happy to see my friends. Bod, happy to see you up and about, and hope you're feeling okay. And also Akeem, wonderful to be together with you again. Look, I think you actually have said it all in your opening statement when you talked about climate. I say often that COVID and climate are two sides of the same coin. Really, like COVID, like climate. As it goes for COVID, so it's going to go for climate. And those figures you gave were actually perfect. It was really quite stark. You know, you talked about 3-point-something billion people only responsible for 3% of the emissions. And we also have exactly at this moment about the same exact number of people, about 3-point-something billion people, also having no vaccines, whilst the others who are also responsible for all the emissions have all the vaccines. So when climate change is being discussed and when we're also funding for climate, it is also again going to be turned on its head. We are seeing the same issue go round and round, and the global pandemic has really revealed the international linkages between nations and societies, and the numbers of cases and the even the way we measure cases. The metric by which we measure severity, you know, people are saying that Africa is not badly affected because Africa doesn't have ICUs overrun, Africa doesn't have hospitals overrun, etc. But there are no ICUs. There are very few hospital beds. So we cannot use the same metric. That in itself is inequality, the metric by which we measure the severity of the disease. And so we are also immediately disadvantaged because we are already disadvantaged. So the world says, well, we're not seeing your hospitals and your ICUs full, which don't exist. Therefore, you don't have a problem. Look, the pandemic has really shown the fault lines. You know, you said the haves and the have-nots, and that is the best way to put it. We are seeing an expansion in the inequity. You know, it's not just inequality. There's a huge difference between inequality and inequity. They're interrelated, but they're different. And we are seeing a fracturing of this world along those lines. You know, we in the pre-talk, myself and Akeem were talking about the beginnings of this year, which are really quite shaky. You know, they're shaking one. As you hear, you know, of the talks of what's going on in Eastern Europe, you hear, you know, of coups in Western Africa, and you also hear the rise of Omicron. And you know, Omicron, by the way, also now has a subvariant. As I say, it now has children and grandchildren. So we don't know that this thing is over. And it most certainly is not over for most of us. So all those situations we're talking about, they're caused by a feeling of inequality. They're caused by a feeling of a lack of inclusion. And so inequality is much wider than just income distribution. Anders earlier was talking about income distribution and high-income countries and more people are now in a lower middle-income countries. I would disagree with some of that analysis, is that more countries might have moved, but the sheer numbers of people have not really moved in any way, shape or form. That's my initial response.
Mr. Steiner, you worked extensively with both global challenges such as the environment and the climate, but also very much with country-specific development. And how would you like to address this broad spectrum of inequality that we're seeing now?
Thank you, Nikolai, and good to join you. And Bart, good to see you. And despite COVID, good to have you with us. And thank you also for the invitation to join this. And I think Dr. Alakija just laid out the spectrum already. And I think from where we look at inequality today, and UNDP in 2019, with the Human Development Report, took this issue actually very much to the core of our whole development discourse. It was that report on beyond income, beyond averages, beyond today. And I think what is stark in understanding not only inequality in its phenomenology, which we can measure in different ways, I think increasingly what we are seeing also is that inequality has an extraordinary corrosive force in our societies. Because whether you look at it globally, the numbers are well known. We live in an extremely unequal world, and it's just gotten a lot more unequal as the pandemic progressed. And the same is actually true within countries. So for much of UNDP's daily work, it is to help governments appreciate, first of all, who are those who have been left behind? Secondly, how are you able to assist them to not be structurally trapped in this poverty that they find themselves in? And I think in our development arena, we need to understand also that inequality very quickly translates into something that has to do with a sense of justice or injustice, and also insecurity. So much of what we're witnessing today in our evening news around the world, when people go onto the streets, start protesting, when we see coup d'etats, when we see implosions of state institutions and even social contracts across many countries, and notably not only in poor countries, but also in developed and middle-income countries, because inequality is that corrosive force that begins to tear at the fabric of a society. So much of what we have to focus on is, first of all, to understand who are the people and why are they continuously stuck in this cycle of poverty, and sometimes even people who escape extreme poverty. This is one of the most disconcerting figures. 40% of them fall back into extreme poverty. Why? For instance, because there is no healthcare system that provides a basic health insurance. So for many people, when their father, their mother, their son, their daughter falls ill, all the savings are essentially deployed in order to rescue that individual. And so the whole family falls back into extreme poverty. It's just one more aspect that the pandemic has in many ways amplified, but also put a spotlight on. And I think in the way that we move forward is that we have to recognize that poverty is not the price of development. There was a kind of chronology of, first of all, you industrialize, you urbanize. Yes, inequality is a price that comes with it, and later you correct for that. Look at our world today. Look at how many parts of the world societies are falling apart. That kind of chronology of trickle-down development, which it was called in the 70s and 80s, still persists in some ways in the way we approach the issue today. It simply is no longer tenable, neither at national level, nor really as a global family of nations. And that is, I think, the core challenge to all of us who work in development. But let me also emphasize, in the political leadership, in the geopolitical perspectives of crisis management, in the security outlook on the world, we live in a profound age of human insecurity.
Thank you. Bård Vegar, Director of Norad, I'd like to comment on this as well. How is this diagnosis that we are hearing here changing your perspective on global development and progress? And how is Norad dealing with these questions of inequality?
Well, first, thanks to Akim and Jodi for joining us. Great to see you. And I'm doing fine in isolation here back in my home so far. I think it's at the core, inequality will be at the core of development assistance and international development work in the decades to come, even more so than it used to. Of course, if you take the long view, we have behind us a generation or so of immense social and economic progress, right? And even though it was slowing down a little bit before COVID-19, We've seen extreme poverty falling. Growth rates were for many years higher in many developing economies compared to rich countries. But the pandemic seems to be increasing inequality to a quite high degree, and we probably don't know the full picture yet. But of course, we see it in economic inequality. I mean, in many rich countries, or many of the biggest companies in the world, and the owners of them, they've been doing really well. And in developed economies, rich countries like Norway, we've had the economy to keep people employed, to use our welfare state, and actually to keep the economy running, and to make sure that our businesses don't go bankrupt and so on, which has been important for our countries, but also means that we're doing relatively well. But none of this has been true especially for the least developed countries and lower middle income countries. And we see now, like Policy Director Lars Loe was showing this morning, that growth rates can be back to what was expected for many developed economies, while for the least developed countries, they will remain low. But maybe also, Nikolai, we are talking about some kind of multidimensional inequality, because I think that also other factors are important. Jodi, of course, mentioned vaccine equity, or the lack of it, which is underpinning all this. As long as we don't have more equity in vaccines, this inequality will probably continue to rise. But also look at an issue like education, or human resources, like Kim talked about. I just saw Uganda, an important country, partner country for us. Kids have been out of school for almost 2 years. Imagine what kind of inequality that will create compared to countries in the Nordic region, for instance, where we have been doing relatively better in terms of education, and all the effects it has on gender equality and all these things. So I think that this inequality and the consequences of it will be a major issue for anyone working with international development cooperation in the decades to come.
Thank you. I'd like to ask this brilliant panel. It seems every time something bad happens, whether it's a financial crisis or increased food prices or a pandemic or nature crisis, it seems inequality increases as a result of that. Sometimes this is referred to as the Matthew effect. And this could, of course, lead us into fatalism, that this is just how the world works, right? But this also fundamentally breaks with what we think the world ought to be. And within the development community, I think we're constantly adopting visions and agendas and goals that revolves around very much the question of what the world ought to be. Just think of the SDGs. But from what we've heard today, it's really hard to reconcile that with what we're currently experiencing. And if more crises, such as the climate crisis or the nature crisis or even pandemics, if that represents the new normal in a way in the coming years, how can we break out of this tendency of constantly increased inequality and that gulf between what we think the world ought to be and what it seems to be? This is sort of the widened gap that also Bill Gates talked about. Mr. Steiner, Esther Duflo also mentioned that global warming will harm poor countries much more than rich countries as well. So how can we change the way that crises always seem to at least increase inequality?
I think the simplest way to answer this, Nikolai, is something that common sense and intuition will essentially answer itself to every citizen. It's together. And this is the fascinating moment in time that we live in. I mean, people are in some ways experiencing the opposite of solidarity, of coming together. Many are, often talking about the crisis of multilateralism. But, the harsh truth is what we're struggling with is, can we live up to essentially the needs of our time? In UNDP, we have embraced that narrative of living in the age of the Anthropocene, where the collective impact of humans is now literally shaping the geological, the biophysical realities of this planet. It is a different era in which we live. And I think that notion of responding together can then be broken into many different component parts. For instance, in a world that is wealthier than ever in human history in monetary terms, where just 4 countries, the United States, China, Japan, and Germany, account for half the world's GDP, where the GDP of the United States is the equivalent of that of 170 countries. Do we begin to understand that it is actually within, first of all, our reach, but also our responsibility to look at how we collectively invest in one another? The idea that somehow development is getting to a certain per capita GDP and then you're on your own and see if you can sink or swim simply doesn't work in a world of pandemics, of climate change, of very differential responsibilities. And so I think at the core of the way forward is not the absence of answers and ways to do it. We have plenty of them. In fact, you heard Hans just speak to many of the examples of how it can be done, how it has been done. The tragedy of our time is that we are not able to pivot in the way that our institutions, our national institutions, but also globally, are able to articulate a rationale for acting together. Climate change and the notion that the poorest countries who have contributed the least should now borrow money expensively in order to do things quicker that wealthier countries are not willing to do, including those who produce fossil fuels, whose economies have been built around the 20th century economy, have not been able to come up with $100 billion. This is the kind of fatalism that is self-inflicted. It is not inevitable. These are choices we make. And I think our role as development practitioners is not to argue for the next project where we can dig some more wells, maybe deeper wells because the water tables are dropping, but actually to come to a point where the idea that Africa, for instance, could be the next frontier of an energy revolution, that the wealthier countries have every reason not just to lend money or to provide some philanthropy, but to co-invest significantly in Africa's, first of all, transition towards a continent where the majority of people actually have access to electricity, and secondly, an energy infrastructure that is renewable and low carbon. But what are we doing? We meet year after year, and we cannot even manage to mobilize $100 billion. And the same story translates into the response to the pandemic. And yes, politics is complicated. Our societies are very impatient. But this is an age where wisdom is needed more than ever, because otherwise what we're doing right now is to undermine the very foundations upon which we actually depend to get beyond this point. The fact that we can do this, that it is feasible, is beyond question in my mind.
Dr. Alekija, do you agree? How do you see the way forward in a time of crisis?
Look, I think first of all, let me break this down. I think we refer to both inequality in this. We're mixing the terms: inequality, which are unbalanced conditions, unequal distribution of resource, and inequity, which is a state of being unfair and unequal. And there are unavoidable differences arising from poor governance and cultural exclusion. These are some of the things that we're discussing. Equity needs to be achieved before people can achieve equality. And so your question is how? I agree with a lot of what Hakeem has said. I mean, I think the current crisis that we're in is an opportunity for the world, for all of us to shift the balance of power, to begin to change the alliances and allegiances that control who has a say, who gets to make decisions, who gets to review and reorder things, who gets an invitation to sit at the table. I did an interview yesterday with Development Today with a journalist who's actually based in Norway, I believe. And one of the conversations, the core of our conversation was around the fact that I have recently been invited to sit at the big boys table, so to speak, and that how is that going to change things, for instance, for the ACT Accelerator? I mentioned to Hakeem earlier that this is what we need to begin to do more of. We need to have the voices of those who are most affected, those who can tell you that inequity and inequality to me mean totally different things. You know, we have a world, let me go to practicalities. You know, we're linking COVID and climate. I really like that. I recently, myself, together with Madhuka Pai, wrote an article in Science magazine in which we did the same thing. Like COVID, like climate. You know, we're being asked to pay for something that we haven't caused. Half of my life is in the Pacific Islands of Fiji, and of course we've all seen the news this week. My dog, who is behind me, his name is Tonga, and he reminds me all the time of what has just happened in Tonga with the earthquake and the effects of climate on that part of the world. And yet the whole world is not including their voices to a large extent at the main decision-making table. Those very, very resource-challenged islands are being expected to cough up resources to pay for the inequity and the inequality that the West has caused them. I have seen the effects. I lived through Cyclone Winston and saw the effects of schools that were flattened, communities that were flattened. But Bart spoke just now about education. And again, I want to speak to education in the context, not of climate this time, but of COVID. Education has completely destroyed so many of the gains we've made in gender equality. And as a woman, I would have to really lean in on that. Girls are no longer going to school. Girls are being married off at a really early age. People are being sold into sex slavery because the poverty that has arisen as a result of COVID means that girls are being deprioritized in communities and in families. We have to go down to the basics of this. We can talk at a very high level about multidimensional poverty index, and we can indices, and we can talk about, what it is that can be done at sort of high level, but we also need a bottom-up approach. We need to go back to the basics of why we became development practitioners. There was a lot of participant observation going on back in the day, but now you don't need participant observation. You don't need people to go into communities and do participant observation because we have technology. We need to use that technology to bring in the voices from what we call the global south. That is the only way. That is the how of how we're going to fix the inequality going forward. We cannot have a world where we are so separated, where we're so divided, where the decision-making table looks one way and the rest of us at the end of the decisions, at the sort of receiving end of the decisions, look another. We cannot have one part of the world deciding who lives and who dies, who is educated and who is not, who has food on their table and who does not. So the how means inclusion. The how means lifting some up. Talent, they say, is universal. Opportunity is not. Creating opportunities so that those of us who have not had a voice at those tables can begin to show those who have had that voice and have the resources how we can work together, hand in hand, together as one, to make this world a more equal place.
I think this is interesting because domestically, when we try to deal with, for example, rising income inequality, you tend to tax progressively. You tend to look at the needs of the poor, and then you look at the resources of the rich, and then you redistribute, right? But and some would perhaps say that foreign aid has been a sort of tool for a sort of global redistribution. But as we know, foreign aid is far from enough. We're talking about huge challenges here. What will an adequate response to global inequality look like then, on a state-to-state level? One thing is what we hope to achieve in poorer countries in terms of poverty reduction. That's one thing, where foreign aid clearly is one of the tools. But what are the implications for the rich countries? What are the specific consequences for rich countries as well? This seems to go beyond the existing tools that we have. I'd like to hear you comment on this. Vegard, you can start this one.
Well, that's a good question. And just drawing a bridge from the last one, because I'm a great fan of goals, really, to be honest. Not because they're realistic, but because they, maybe it's not my background in politics, but they draw resources, right? And they draw focus and attention, and they set a bar for us. And I think we've seen this, in many national contexts, but also globally. Look at the Paris Agreement, their goals, the MDGs, the SDGs, or the NATO 2% goal, to say something very differently. And that's also, I think, what we need to do now. We're in a situation now where the goals and the reality is diverging. It's becoming tougher to reach the SDGs and so on. What we should do is to challenge ourselves, the private sector, the public sector, everyone. What do we actually need to do to reach these goals if we are serious about the problems they will create? And my take on that would also be on inequality. Well, we're spending most of our resources, whether it be public or private, in our own country, in our own context. While the major problems now, the pandemic, the climate crisis, inequality, are global issues. Maybe we simply have to spend more there, use the evidence better, like we've heard, and and challenge ourselves to do more and do it better.
Before we let the others comment, as we're approaching the end of this panel as well, but I would like specifically to hear as well, if you could say something about how should we tackle this increase of inequality that stems from, for example, within the pandemic response, that stems from the fact that health ministers and state leaders just like to prioritize their own populations first, right? If we look at the last couple of years, has this period been a major blow to global solidarity and to multilateralism? Or has it been an eye-opener in terms of the interdependence between countries? I would like to hear you comment on that as well. So you can comment on that, Mr. Steiner.
Well, let me first of all agree with Mark completely. I think goals help us to focus, and I would make a very strong plea that the world has one set of goals right now, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. It is actually our agenda for, first of all, recognizing the key challenges, the key risks to our common future that we agreed in 2015. There are targets, there are indicators, but I think most importantly, we have a shared understanding of what will define what happens next in our world, on our planet. So in the midst of this crisis, there are some who are essentially getting entangled in the indicators and targets. I would appeal to all of us, don't get lost in the detail. The fact that we actually have the SDGs is also the very foundation for dealing with what ultimately will become the long tail of this pandemic. It is not the health crisis in itself, the virus as such. It is the social, the economic, the political fallout that will be a long tail. And our ability to act on that has to begin by also putting in place an equivalent stimulus that allows the wealthier countries of this world, and here I specifically also look to the G20, to put in place an SDG stimulus or something along those lines. I think the numbers are, as always, going to be something that one has to debate and agree on. But just for argument's sake, 10% of all the stimulus packages in the G20 country put together as an SDG stimulus short-term for the next few years to help countries recover, to avoid the kind of debt risk scenario that we already see. This is the most immediate just in the financial system, to address the extreme poverty that has grown by over 100 million people, to facilitate and accelerate the kind of investments that then allow us to, give access to energy. One reason why UNDP in the next 3 years has committed itself to something it has never done in its history, namely trying to assist 500 million people, 500 million people, to gain access to affordable clean energy, is not because we think this is easily doable, but because we think there is just no other way in which we can put forward a commensurate response and work with others to achieve this. And that is in part premised also on an understanding that the SDGs carry. You can deal with something like climate change, SDG 13, energy, SDG 7, poverty, SDG 1, with the very same project. Enabling rural communities across Africa through mini off-grids to have access to electricity is about poverty reduction, it's access to energy, it is about dealing with a low-carbon energy future, it addresses gender issues and gender inequality that I also referred to. That is the way we need to approach development, and we need to go to scale. If we continue to try to respond to this mega crisis with mini projects and initiatives, we are doomed to fail. And just the last word, do we know what the outcome will be in terms of solidarity, multilateralism falling apart as a world community? No, I don't think we do. But to those who say, oh, it's all too late and we have fallen apart, no, we have not. We have gone through these crises in history. Usually common sense and also a fundamental sense of solidarity do eventually prevail. The question is, can we make this happen faster and more effectively, because we live in a world of 8 billion people now in the midst of an extraordinary crisis, almost without precedent in terms of synchronicity.
All right, Dr. Al-Haqiqa, just 30 seconds, final comment. What are your thoughts on what the pandemic is showing us about ourselves and the international collaboration and global collective action?
Well, a global crisis requires a global response. And at the moment, we're acting in silos. We're not acting as a world. I've said repeatedly, and I think it's been repeated before in Norway, that a once in 100-year crisis demands a once in 100-year level of response and global solidarity. We need to reimagine the systems that we have and the institutions that we currently have. That is my short answer to it. That many of our institutions and our systems are proving themselves to not be fit for purpose within this pandemic and will not be fit for purpose in a post-pandemic world. So if we're going to survive as a global society, it was good to hear Akeem refer to the G20. I also talk about the G7. We need to begin to relook at these structures and what exactly, as well as multilateralism as it exists, and how do we improve that? It is absolutely the way to go, multilateralism. But, just like the Second World War reshaped the world in many ways, I believe COVID and this current crisis leading us into climate, which we hope doesn't become a crisis, will also help us to reshape the world and to have a more equal balance of representation and voices going forward so that we can leave a better world for our generations to come. Thank you.
And finally, I'll let my boss also have 30 seconds for a final comment. Bård Vegar.
Well, you and your 30 seconds, I totally echo Akim and Yodi. So just let me add, we're seeing two competing trends, really. One of we have to take more care of ourselves now in dangerous times. It started before COVID, but also one of, look how interconnected we are. That all the solutions, whether it be climate or COVID, are global. We're not safe until the rest of the world is safe, and it's for real. And that just me, and also by saying that I'm really energized by this day. From the discussion this morning was the Norwegian Minister of Development on the Beathe Tvinnereim and the rest of the day, and maybe also picking up the challenge from Ola Rosling, because I like goals, and he was giving us the challenge, and I wrote it down. Norway should be the first fact-based country in the world. And I thought that was interesting. It's a long stretch, but maybe both Norad and others and Norway could do even more to base our decisions on a better understanding on the facts. I think that would lead us to prioritizing global issues and global solutions more, and maybe also to working in better ways and doing better decisions on all these issues, for instance, inequality.
Unfortunately, it's my job to end now. This has been highly interesting, and I just need to thank you all for sharing your thoughts and insights, and also showing just a little bit of what lies ahead of us. Thank you so much on behalf of NORAD for your participation.
Ladies and gentlemen, this conference has 3 take-home messages. 0 poverty, 0 emissions, and facts inform policy. And how do we get there? By game-changing solutions. Now, before we round off, we'd like to invite you to another global event coming up. On the 16th and 17th of February, Norway will be hosting the Global Disability Summit, and you're all welcome. Please check the program and sign up at globaldisabilitysummit.org. All right, the 2022 NORAD conference is now over, and we'd like to thank you so much, everybody. All the great panelists, the organizers, the technical team, speakers and moderators, and all of you who have been watching from far and near. Thank you very much, and welcome back next year.